Asteroid of fear.
How about it?
Yeah, you never know. Like
Never know.
the other day, actually, the latest episode I dropped, I included the whole thing before I actually did the intro because there was a piece in the beginning of the conversation that was actually good. It wasn't necessarily intended to be part of the show, but
Amen.
um
I've done that before too. Pre-show chatter. Sometimes where you get your best sound bites, right?
yeah, yeah.
True.
And then we talked afterwards and I'm like, man, I should have left it recording. Lesson learned. Like
Lesson
that's why I do
learned.
it in the beginning. This is why you do it in the end. And it was funny before you got on. Um, I the other day I had a protein shake and the lid came off right before an interview. And I had protein stuff everywhere all over my desk. And I saw a spot on my headphones. And so I'm sitting there, I'm taking it off and I'm getting everything set up and I'm like, my mic's not working, whatever. And I didn't have my headphones plugged in to the mic. I was like, because I forgot I was like unwinding it and cleaning it.
Yeah.
And I was like, uh, it's that kind of day. But I just kind of laughed at it. I was like,
You do. You gotta kind of let it flow, right? Like I always say, let go and let God, because
yeah,
I've had sound issues where I've had to switch from the phone to the computer. I've had to switch from the computer to the phone. I've had coughing fits that I'm like, oh my goodness.
yes, I had one of those too. And it's funny because I had one with like somebody that I interviewed that I now do group coaching and business coaching with. And I had this coughing fit, but they've had like 1,800 episodes. He's like, no,
Oof.
take your time, take your time. They do one
Yeah.
a day, like 20 to 40 minutes.
Unbelievable. You know
Yeah,
what? That would be my goal.
yeah,
I mean, if I didn't
yeah.
have to edit them all and do all the work myself.
Yeah.
That's
So
the
I
hardest part.
agree. I agree.
Yeah.
And kind of what I learned along the way was I've done a couple with StreamYard as a guest and some of the people who are like where it kind of goes live and they don't edit it at all. And
Yeah.
I feel like I learned and got the editing process down and started using transcription editing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I've
And
seen about that.
I got way faster and better at it, only to realize I was like, I'm not gonna edit as much. And then I did like a solo episode and I said, hey, like I want you guys to get the natural conversation. Like the
Agreed.
the value is in the content of the conversation. The
Yeah.
value is not necessarily in the edit. I'm not a
Right.
feature film editor. Um, and so it's not about the perfection. And so I started editing less. And that was part of my decision to also leave the sound bites in from the beginning. Yeah. So
I
that's kind
understand
of where
that.
I'm at.
Yeah, I understand that. It's a lot too, and it's a lot to learn. If it's someone like, me, I
Yeah,
just decided 2 years ago I'm just gonna do it, and it's a lot to learn.
it is.
And there's so many, just facets of it, and you don't know always what's the right way to go. So
Yeah,
you kind of just like
for
go in
me,
at
it
the seat
took
of your
time and
pants.
kind of research
Yeah,
and go like, how can I do this like with as few programs as possible? So I just use
exactly.
Zoom and CapCut Pro
Yeah.
because CapCut Pro allows me to throw in images with like I'm part of the Podcast Connection Network and we do
Okay.
commercials
Oh,
and or like advertisement. And
right.
so I'm able to put our logo in there amidst the stream and then
Awesome.
drops the sound bite. And then when you convert it, you get both the video and audio. And so it takes what I liked about it was you didn't need separate programs to convert, whether it's,
Yeah.
a movie, MP3, different formats. And so then once you throw it all into CapCut Pro on the desktop and you convert it to one video, one audio, you get one finished product that's one file format and it's
Wow.
only like $11 a month. So I was
I'm
like,
gonna look into that because I just started using something called Riverside FM because I just started actually. I've always Zoomed them or had them
hmm
in person, but just actually recording them and being able to actually edit the video. I have not been able to do that. I've been using just audio for a year, over 2 years, almost
yeah,
2 years now. And so I've finally been able to start doing that. And they help you cut it into reels and for
Mhm.
TikTok and they give you the sound bites and you can add stuff and I was like, oh, this is really cool because it's in one program because you'll get gouged too, needing
Yeah.
3, 4, 5 different
Well,
programs
and
to
that's
do
the
all these
thing with
different things.
CapCut too. It has that long to short feature. So I drop
Yeah,
the finished product in there and it makes the clips and you can tell it how long you want to make the clips and it adds the captions and all that.
very
And
cool. I'm gonna look
you
into
can
that one
change it
too, see
out.
which one is better. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I just use Zoom and CapCut and that's it. So I pay
Call it
for
a day.
Zoom, that and Podmatch and but yeah. So I have your outline kind of over here, but kind of I think what I want to focus on is we seem to have good rapport with conversation. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna go with I'm gonna give a brief introduction and we're gonna I one of the topics or in the descriptor of the podcast is navigating the chaos of everyday life.
Hmm.
And so I want to say, hey, what's the perspective of navigating the chaos of everyday life from a female over 40 with all the different things that you do? Because I just listened to an episode this morning on healthy minds, healthy lives.
Yes, thank you.
And there were so many different aspects, whether it's
Yeah,
dating, body image, how you were brought up. And so I'll probably ask you a little bit about your
sure.
upbringing, how that's influenced, and then, of course, how it's changed because I'm 48, I have a 10-year-old, and, the being the parent, but I've been with the same woman 18 years, so I don't have the dating challenges. But I
God
hear
bless
about it
you.
because we have 21-year-old and 20-year-old daughters as well. And
Yeah,
I
starting over, don't you
hear
love it?
I hear about all the people's woes and other podcasts talk about, the difficulty of dating. And I just interviewed a marriage and therapy counselor yesterday, and she
Okay.
talks a lot about relationships. And, um, it was interesting that she went to school for journalism, but she grew up in Japan, but her dad was white. So she moved to America. And then she didn't know how to navigate dating. And so
Oh
she
yeah.
started seeing a therapist to navigate dating and was
Wow.
like, oh, you can do this and you can learn to do this and help other people.
Yes.
And so she became a marriage and therapy counselor or
Very
a family
cool.
counselor. And I just thought it was so unique. And so to hear those challenges, whether they're cultural from an
Okay.
upbringing, and in Japan, she said women were basically, it's old school, like 1950s America. You
Yeah,
grow up,
I
you
bet.
get married, and then you stay home, and the husband goes to work, and the family's very separated with this and
Wow.
that. And how that shapes your view and how you approach it.
Yeah.
And so it kind of makes sense that, you know, kind of that how tackling it very cerebral by saying, I'm gonna go to a therapist and
Agreed.
figure out these things.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
very, that's just, it's also very brave.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
very brave to go against what you're used to, what you're raised with, and say, I don't want to do it that way, regardless of where I live. That's very brave to me. It
yeah.
really is. Yeah, yeah.
Well, and that's what the whole thing is. And yeah. All right, hold on. Because I'm like, I think our generations are kind of in this
We
breaking
are.
generational curses
Mm,
and norms. And I'm Latino, and especially too going against what, you know, I'm the first one that doesn't speak Spanish. Because when my parents moved here, or my mom's family, it was more about assimilation.
that's
And
right.
I always say nobody knew Mexicans would be so popular. And she was an interpreter for years at the hospital, and I got kind of gypped because she married a white dude, and it was more about being
Wow.
alike and staying under the radar than it was
Agreed.
kind of expressing who you are and what you are.
I
And
agree.
so,
Absolutely,
you
completely.
know,
And yeah,
they're like, oh, I can remember my mom saying like, oh, the career you want, want out there is it's not out there. And I go, well, if you think like that, it's not,
and that's a
but
fantastic way to think about it.
being a
Yes.
podcaster, whatever it is, I do many different things. And that was kind of similar to what, you were like my regular job, my this, the podcast. I do all these different things. Some are for the family, some are for me, but it really doesn't matter, and
Exactly.
I think our older generational parents are more in kind of this, they're more in they only did for family. It was only about family or advancing the next generation, which is not bad.
Yeah.
It comes from a great place, but the world has changed, and they would have never known it to change
No,
this much.
no.
And they never really could have prepared for it because we're really not even prepared for it. We're still
Oh,
navigating it on a
and
daily
not to
basis.
mention, we can't even, we're Gen X, millennial. We can't even raise our kids in the world we were raised because that world
Right.
doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
It does not exist anymore. I don't raise my kids to say I can't
Right.
because, I was lucky in that sense that I wasn't raised like that. My mother would say, you can do anything you want. But of course, I always felt that there was still that caveat of, but don't expect much. Right. So it was like,
And
it
that's
was,
that's that almost like an immigrant mindset.
and my mother's not an immigrant.
Oh.
That's what's crazy.
Hmm. But it's still ingrained
It's
culturally.
ingrained. That's what it is. It's ingrained culturally because other generations were like, look, I was very lucky to be raised. I had very, very strong women that always felt that, look, they when their husbands either passed away or they got, I have my grandmother who got divorced in the 60s. That was not done. You know what I mean? It was just not
Yeah.
done at all, especially for Puerto Rican families, Hispanic families, it was not done. But it was basically like, look, I'd rather have to do this and deal with the repercussions, meaning getting shunned from your church and all those things, than dealing with this that I can't handle. You know what I'm saying? And so it's really about, I think, but then teaching your
That's
kid
so weird because that's going against cultural norms then,
exactly,
and you're doing the same
exactly,
thing, but it's
exactly,
taking, so in a way, some of it did set you up, but it took generations to bleed through or
right,
get to where it might be more useful and actually really propel um, what I would say our culture, our
right.
family name, our family
Yes.
curses that we deal with,
Yes. I
and
think about
stomp
that a
them
lot
out.
because one thing, that I was raised believing again is that you can do anything. You have to work toward it. I don't care if you're cleaning a toilet or you're
Hmm.
building a building. You better make it so that toilet's so clean that you can eat out of it. You know what I
Right.
mean? So in a way, these were some of the many generational curses and, and generational traumas that were handed through that we're trying to heal from still in a way that also kind of sets you up in a place as well where we become overachievers and we
Yeah.
set ourselves up for disappointment very easily. That's been
Oh.
something that's happened to me still. It gives us imposter syndrome a lot of the time, and I can't speak again on the
Hmm.
male side of that, but on the female side, I suffer from that all the time, imposter syndrome for everything that I do. And I have to constantly heal through that and continue to heal through that and realize, look, this may not be going your way right now, and it may not go your way in the future, but right now is what you need to focus on. Focus on what you're doing now and how it's affecting you and your family. And if you feel good about it, if your spirit feels good about it, if your energy feels good about it, if you're putting something out there that is going to positively impact your family, your friends, humanity, whatever it
Right.
is, then you're doing okay. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
And I think it's all about intention, really.
Agreed.
Because I think wherever
Agreed.
you go with that, I mean, I podcast, I Uber Eats, I'm a father, a husband, and those are the roles I take kind of more seriously. And, I do many different things so I can have a level of flexibility to actually put more of my time and effort into being the best version of myself first. That
Yeah.
way I can show up for my wife and my daughter second, and
Yeah.
then the world third. And then whether that's Ubering and taking somebody their food or helping them out, making their life easier for the day,
Yep.
it's, when I go and pick up, I try to be nice, I try to be friendly. And so there's always these opportunities to connect. If you go out there with the intention of, hey, I'm going to be friendly to this hostess,
Yeah.
the restaurant business can be brutal, and
Yes, it
maybe
can.
maybe I'm the one smile that they're going to get for the day.
I
And
agree.
so,
You sound like me in mail form, actually. I'm like, I do DoorDash, I deliver pizzas
uh-huh.
for pizzeria, I have the podcast, I have my day job, where I'm a professional
Yep.
day job. That's really funny.
Yeah, it is. But
Yeah.
you know, it's really about um to me, you know, as I've been kind of on this exploration and growth journey, it's really been about, you know, breaking what was always kind of socially norm, because you have to
Mhm.
remember, I say I'm the first one to not speak Spanish
Yeah.
because it was more about assimilating than
Yes.
it was standing out. And therefore, it's ingrained in me to assimilate. And I have a master's degree and go back to that 9 to 5 healthcare management role
Mm.
that I got laid off from that was a blessing. And I've learned that freedom is what I crave the most. And that freedom of movement to be, you know, I can go, I can make all the workouts, but I can be flexible with workouts. I get to have great conversations with people like yourself every
Yeah.
day. I get when my daughter's sick to take her to the doctor and stay
Yes.
home and wait on her. And to me, it's about breaking what other people think is normal and going, well, if I have to do 5 different things
Yeah.
that take time, um, then I will. But you know, as long as we have everything we need, I'm able to, you know, because money's not everything, I'm able to maybe be present or
Right.
be in the moment when I'm taking care of my daughter. Because if I have to cancel a guest or something, you know, I had to take care of my father weeks ago, and I had to cancel a whole week, and
Yeah.
because he ended up in the ICU or something, and it was
Oh, I'm
like,
sorry to hear that. Hope he's better.
yes, but you know, it was this whole thing, and it was being able to do all that
Yeah.
that is the
I agree.
reward. That there's no monetary value to be able to be the person you need to be for both yourself and your family and those around you, your friends, you know, your family that are your friends, because
Yeah.
family comes in many forms.
Yes, it does. I
So,
agree with that because, I say one day I hope to be, I mean, I'm very blessed in the sense that with my full-time job, I have a lot of flexibility.
mhm,
So I'm blessed. I get to work from home a couple days a week. I go in the office. I have my father who's retired. He helps me with my young son. You know what I mean? So when I'm not able to be there, and I do work multiple multiple
yeah,
jobs, but even with those, I'm able to have enough flexibility that I'm able to be able now to be there for my kids when I need to. Years ago, 8, 10 years ago, when I was in different positions, I didn't always have that exact same flexibility.
yeah,
And I had to rely on not just other people, but other establishments to take care when I was a single mom back then I was a single mom as well. And had no choice but to miss out on certain things that I
yeah.
didn't want to miss out on.
It's very locked in, like, you know,
It
like you're
is.
having to rely on a daycare maybe,
Yes.
and then you work all day, and then maybe you pick them up and you've barely had enough time to take a breath for yourself, and then it's on
Yes.
to the next thing. But, you know, it's making you also participate in these systems that aren't always necessarily, you know, systems are created to manage large things. So you
Agreed.
kind of need it in a way, but there's no flexibility. And within freedom, people love choice. They want to
Yeah.
be able to choose how their kids get taken care of, because nobody's going to take care of them like you or
Right.
your dad. Or like
Right.
for me, it's me, my mom, my wife, everybody. And
Yeah.
so, you know, making that easier, whether it be through legislation and tax credits or something.
Right. Right.
There's
It
so
has
many
to be.
different ways that we can try to make it easier and better to give people more choice and freedom, because participation in these systems, um, it feels like you're on a hamster wheel.
I was just gonna say the same thing. It feels like a hamster wheel, right? And for me, I always feel like if I'm not able to stay on it, I'm not just falling off, I'm getting thrown off into the glass.
But
Like when
isn't it funny
you're
that
getting
that's the idea
flung
of
off.
stability for some people? But I mean,
Yes.
that's okay that it is. And I think some people need that. But like
Yeah.
for me, it doesn't suit my personality or align with me. And I found that out after doing it only for 12 years. But
We do. So I think, well, listen, I've been with
but
my,
actually working in the ER for 12 hours and I had a lot
oh,
more flexibility and I enjoyed it. So
yeah.
it was much more fulfilling. But the second 6 years when I was in management, and
Yes.
not only did I have the confiscation, but then
Yeah.
I had the 2 a.m. phone calls, the weekends, the power outages, and everything that goes with
Yes.
managing two ambulatory sites. You're like,
Oh, God bless you.
it never ended. And
I
so,
have that history in healthcare, and working in hospitals. And then I also have, the past 13 years working in my job where I work in dental insurance and I work in IT.
oh
So it's the
wow.
same thing. It's the
Mhm.
constant 24/7 inundation of, my phone going off, and it's, and don't get
We
me
need
wrong,
to
there's certain
upgrade.
things
We
that
need to
me,
upgrade over the weekend, and
yeah,
so
and
these
there's a lot of
systems will be
things for
done.
me that I'm like, you know what? I'm not even acknowledging it because it does not affect me, like my particular position. But other
Right.
times it stays rent free in your head, right? That all the things you have to do, all the things you're coming into, all the things that are happening while you're not necessarily logged in, it still stays rent free in your head. And I think when you said that made me laugh, 12 years for me, I've been in this company 13 years, over 13 years now. And I say to myself, at this point, I've gotten to the point, and I don't think I would have gotten there earlier in my life.
Right.
But now I'm at the point that I'm like, and I think COVID had a lot to do with it for most of us as well, where we
Hmm.
realize there's other ways to live life,
Yeah.
right? There's other ways that we can be extremely productive and still have the flexibility to take care of our families and to live these lives and take care of ourselves as well.
Well, they
And so,
required it, and now the world is mad that
yes.
people want to do it. That
Right. And
people
now they're
don't
like, well,
want to
now we got to
go.
go back. And I'm
Yeah.
like, this is a different world now. You can't
Yeah.
expect us to go back because you're
Once
also
you
not
see it, you
offering.
can't unsee it.
And the world is not offering the same things that there were before. You
No.
have offices that aren't open the same way anymore. You have daycares aren't open at the same hours anymore. Schools, contract disputes constantly. They're changing hours, they're changing days that your
We're
kids are
going
in.
4 days a week. A lot around here have gone for it because they say it's an attraction for teachers,
Yes, right. There's not enough teachers, there's not enough doctors, there's not enough nurses, there's not enough
law enforcement.
law for not even enough librarians at this point. They're closing things down
Hey,
left
we
and
we
right.
we both DoorDash and Uber. There's not enough people at McDonald's making burgers and fries when I go
Yes.
to pick up.
Yes. What I
There's
do laugh
nobody to work
about.
the counter.
It's true. What I do, you're right. You're right. What I do laugh about is sometimes because the one job you will see that there's extra people is DoorDash and Uber Eats because when I
Yeah,
try to get a spot to work, I can't get one.
yeah.
And they're like,
People,
there's no spots right now. Like, try to schedule for this time. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
everybody had the same idea that I did, that kind of thing. So it's just about, I agree. It's just about trying to be able to find that balance and do what you can for yourself and your family that fits best because no one's going to do it for you.
Yeah, it's where do you, I'm trying to figure out kind of, I mentioned that some people kind of think that they just have to report in, exist for 40 hours, and that's an idea of stability.
Yeah,
Um, and I kind of wonder what, I think I could tolerate it when I worked in the emergency room because it's very active and
true.
there's so much difference. And even in healthcare, you know, you do get some crazy things that happen, even though when I was doing urgent care and even in primary care, we had a big facility, a big box, they call it, that had like a gym attached and they look like mini hospitals. And
Oh,
so people, when you're more rural, they don't know that it's not. And so emergencies do pull up. And so it can be exciting, but I think it was all the managerial stuff of feeling like what is this getting me? Is this getting me anywhere? And at first I was a little devastated and went through some identity crisis type things. And then I realized they've given me all these tools and now I can do all these things for myself and I
yeah,
can do multiple things and it's okay. And
yeah,
even though
yeah,
it's less stable because, you may choose to drive, you may choose not, you may
right.
choose this, I also help, like with kind of some healthcare stuff with my father, where
Okay.
the VA pays, I get paid for taking him to appointments, helping him with this and that, the
Oh, and
other.
I've seen that. Yeah, they have those
Yeah.
programs now.
And
Yes,
so,
yes,
it's basically I'm getting paid to do stuff I do anyway.
That you would have done anyway, right?
Right. So,
Yeah.
and that's kind of, with the DoorDash. So, but it has to be recertified. And sometimes that's on the fritz. You're waiting for recertification through medical people. And there's not enough doctors. There's not enough nurses in the
Yeah.
VA.
Oh, the
With
VA is one of
CMS and
the worst,
everywhere,
unfortunately, for that.
everywhere's behind. And so,
Yeah.
even though there's less stability for me, it's still more soothing, or that I find a comfort in
Yeah.
the freedom of, even though I don't know, I don't, yeah, some days I don't know how I
I've always
manage to
said,
thrive in it.
yeah, because sometimes we don't realize that our soul needs that. I always say that. Sometimes that's what it is. We're just like, we're saying the hamster wheel. We're constantly going and going and going. And we don't stop to think, well, what do we want out of our lives?
Yeah.
What is going to fulfill us? You know what I mean? I always say, I still don't know what may or may not fulfill me, but I don't think that I want to be working um in a corporate world, quote unquote,
Hmm.
until I'm of retirement age, if God gives blesses me with life. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? I always, when I was younger, I had got my education. I was like, I want to be in the corporate world. I want to be up, I want to be sitting in meetings. I want to have my voice heard. And I thought it was something until you get there.
But that's learned too, and it's
Yes,
taught.
it's taught
And I think
until you
especially
get there
too,
and you're like, oh, I'm sick of these meetings.
coming from a minority, it's even almost more important for your
Yes,
parents, like an approval type of thing, because I know I tend to be a people pleaser because that's how you got recognition,
yeah,
or kind of doing better than
yes.
the people before, all the people who did
That's
for you, it's kind
exactly
of
it.
expected.
That's exactly it. It's very much doing better than the generations before, and also proving that your parents were able to do right by you enough.
Yes.
I always say sometimes obviously I'm like, there were plenty of things that I speak of in my podcast, about my childhood that I still had to heal from, or still had healed from, that I look back and I go, wow. I'm like, if I could have rolled the dice, whatever it was, I never would have seen the way my life has been turning out, certain areas of it going the way it went. But then I also look back and go, but I don't know that I even had any that I thought about that either. You know what I mean? I think, well,
Yeah.
I don't remember ever
Yeah. So
discussing these
being
things.
conscious of it yourself now and kind of going through it, and this is very similar to me. How does that impact how you parent?
Whew. I am blessed because I have two beautiful children. They're 10 years apart.
Uh-huh.
So I understand understand with you that's starting over again. For me, it
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily, and I didn't think it was in the cards for me to do that. And I ended up doing that. And one thing I always said, when I was 6 months pregnant, I went back to college for my bachelor's. I'd already had my associates. When I
Hmm.
was 6 months pregnant and I knew I was having a girl, I decided I'm going back to college. And my mother said to me, are you sure you want to do this? And I said, honestly, I don't know. I got to work full time, go to school full time, raise a child
Right.
basically by myself at the time. And I was like, but I want my daughter, when she's of that age, to look back and say, I can do this because my mom did it in very different circumstances. I
Yeah.
wanted my daughter to say, I can do anything because my mom has busted her butt to make sure I have these opportunities that she didn't have or weren't offered to her. Right. Because I mean, maybe if some things were offered to me, I might have been able to, have some of them. Who knows,
It shows you what's possible, but it also
Yes.
shows other people. And I describe like going into management with a 1-year-old while getting my master's degree and learning how to manage people and do all these different things while kind of maybe skipping supervisor roles and going from just
Yes.
person to leader. And you learn what you're capable of,
Yeah.
but
You do.
also, you learn what you can juggle.
You do, and that's what it is. So trying to juggle that portion right now of my daughter's life where it's colleges, it's college tours, it's grades, it's cars, it's driving, it's dating when that comes
Everything
around,
that
it's
comes
all
along
that
with
comes with
being,
the growing and
yeah.
the being a young woman, right? So trying to judge, I guess in a way judge too, because trying to
Mhm.
to judge how we're going to every day take on a new challenge in that respect, plus a little one
Answer
who needs
questions.
Answer the questions. I'm very honest with my daughter. Sometimes probably too honest now
I
that she's
agree.
older.
I'm too because I always say what I'm trying to do is build trust
Yeah,
because we always think
exactly.
our parents we couldn't go to them.
Could not go to
And
them and
so
they
there
didn't
was
tell us anything ever.
right. So I'm trying to make sure and I always tell her, hey, as long as we can know the truth, then we can make the best decision to resolve it, even if it's bad.
Yes. Even if
But
it's bad.
I don't
And I'm
want them
like,
going to friends or whatever
and I
because
may not
we
be
did that.
happy about it. I'm not gonna
Right.
lie to you and say I'm happy, but I will be there for you. I will
Right.
be your biggest advocate.
Nobody has
Always.
your back more than me.
I just told my daughter that yesterday. I will always have your back. Now, I also, don't get me wrong, some of that generational stuff comes through me as well. Because I also say, but don't embarrass me. Don't let
Yeah.
me go have your back. I will advocate for you. I will jump down someone's throat for you, but make sure you're telling me the truth.
If you do
Make sure,
something that I can't get you out of, it's all on you. And I used to
yes,
tell the people I led the same thing. Look, I'll always have your back as your leader, but if you do something that brings down the director and the VP or whatever that was way out of line that I can't help, then sorry. I mean,
right. Right. And that's my thought process is at this point, you are still developing. At this point,
right.
you're going to test the waters. We all did it. I am blessed because I was crazy. I mean, I worked, I went to school at that age. But I was crazy. I was doing, well, God knows what. It was a different time too. We didn't have social media, we
Yes.
have nothing. We were out there acting fools and nobody had no idea about it, And now it's very different. So I'm always having to make sure to understand, have her understand as well. Anything in this life that you do, one, it can end up online and change the trajectory of your life. Two, anything that you do can literally change the trajectory of your life in 2 seconds. So just stop and take a second to think before anything. And I'm just very blessed that she's very level-headed for the most part, probably more than me at times, to be honest. It's pretty funny. Sometimes she'll be like, Mom, I'm like, just because I'm a little like, I'm like, I get excited about things and whatever. And I'm like,
Well, but
I'm
I think
good.
part of that though is I think part of it it's a couple of fold. It's part of what we talked about before in that we're trying to break all these norms that we were led to believe like
Yes.
this was the key to happiness and success, or this is what success looked like. And you get there and you're like, ah, not really. And then
Right.
COVID happened and you're like, no, I don't know. And so we're really trying to grow a lot and navigating a
Yes.
much different world than we anticipated while
And trying to
also
heal from it.
changing, yeah, while trying to shift how you parent, what you think is important as a parent, because now
Yeah,
your view has shifted and
completely.
understanding that the same way the world has evolved for us, who knows how evolved it's going to be for them and
Right.
what can we prepare them for? We can prepare them for the things that, you can learn new things, you can do new things, but there's something about whether it's core values, alignment, who you are, your integrity, willing to do the right thing, willing to be a good citizen, help other people, stand for good over evil. All those things
Yeah.
cannot be, you know, that's what decides the future. That's what decides how the world is, whether
Yep.
countries are at war or not. So
Yep.
those are the things we need to be focusing on and
Yep.
teaching.
Yep. What I do
Because
love,
they'll
and I
figure
know,
out the other stuff.
right, and I know that you said you have a 10-year-old because I haven't, my son is 8.
Hmm.
And one thing that I love that they're teaching in schools, I can't speak for every school, every state, obviously. I know they've been teaching it for a couple of years in my son's school, is SEL. And it's oh my goodness, it's emotional, something
Okay.
emotional learning. I forgot the
Okay.
first word. All of a sudden it's brain fart here.
We'll call it
But
secular. We'll call it
social,
secular.
social,
Secular.
secular, right? Social emotional learning. That's
That's
what it
good.
is. Wow. And it's kind of along those lines as well, is they take time
Hmm.
in the classroom during the day to teach these young kids because nobody knows what goes on in people's households, right? In these kids' households. Nobody
I've
knows what
just been
they're being
talking to
exposed to.
the parent teacher conference. I just said, what if school is the only stable place for them and home
Exactly.
is not? Where else are they going to learn it?
And that's exactly it. And the thing is, you're learning it with your peers. You're
Hmm.
learning how to treat other people from the time you're young. When you could go home and you don't know how your mom, nobody knows how the husband's treating the wife, how the wife's treating the husband, how the parents treating the kids, the neighbors, the work, so on and so forth. There's no way to know that. Now, teachers know everything because those kids tell them everything. let the audience
Yeah.
know you will have no secrets because those teachers know everything what's going on in your household, especially with the little ones. But realistically, what I loved about the idea of this is just teaching these kids that you can affirm your life, you can affirm your neighbor. You're not always going to agree, obviously.
Right.
Right now, we are in a whole world of that, right? But on a whole nother level. But realistically, but treating somebody, trying to like, what is it? The golden rule, treat others as you would want to be treated. I am so, um, I am so proud of my son because even at 8 years old, he's very, he's a little standoffish, he's very, he's very, he's my little old man is what I call him. That's the best way to
Mhm.
say it because he likes to be alone at times. He has his friends, but it's
Yeah,
also like, oh, I like to play my games. I like to not be bothered sometimes. He's like, Mommy, I like my alone time. I'm like, how old are you? I'm like, what
that's
is going on
healthy.
here? Yeah. And he really appreciate that and he voices it. But I want to raise, and I'm trying to raise a young man that loves himself first.
Hmm.
Because I always say you cannot love anybody else properly until you love yourself first.
Yeah.
And nobody taught us that. Nobody taught us that back in the day because that wasn't even a concept. You know what I mean? And
No.
now we have all these relationships where you got, in my case, a few that did not work out. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And not because necessarily I didn't love myself, because I was also with partners that had such issues that it brought out my issues.
Yeah, we're
And
more
now
like
you
trauma bonded.
trauma bonded. That was definitely the second one. I say it, I talk about it in my podcast as well. Completely trauma bonded, but at the time, you have no idea that that's happening.
Yeah.
It's hindsight is always 2020. And I don't want to raise kids. Now they're human, they're going to make their choices, their mistakes, they're going to
Right.
love who they love. God bless them. Right. My biggest thing is I want them to be happy, healthy, successful, and loved. That's all I want for them. But the reality is trying to get them to that place when I'm trying to get to that place myself
It's hard.
is very hard.
It's a
Yeah,
super struggle.
it is. It is because you
Requires a
got to
lot
lead,
of
you have to
effort.
lead by example. You have
Yeah.
to lead by example. And I'm not perfect. God knows I'm
No.
not perfect. I have a mouth of a trucker and my kids are used to it. You
I came
know.
from restaurants, the ER, and
Yeah.
and the Navy. So
It
and
flies.
I've been written up from my mouth as a manager. So let's just say, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I tell my kids, I'm like, listen, you never put your hands on anybody, but if they put their hands on you first, you're allowed to
Yeah.
defend yourself. You know what I mean? Use your voice. Always use your voice. I'm like, you may
Yeah.
be intimidated, but use that voice. I'm like, I know you have a big mouth. You come from a big mouth, and I hear it in the house. So I know you have a big mouth.
Yeah.
It's just trying to teach them the tools while I learn them as well.
Well,
That's
communication is key. I mean, it was like the other night, my daughter had a mini meltdown and it was all over something just, hey, you were sick, you were absent. This is why this isn't ready to turn in. And that's all you had to say. And it was this moment of like, don't get frustrated. I used to have a friend when I lived in Florida, his grandfather Basil used to always say, he went to school for English because if you know the English language, you can do any job because you can
mm-hmm.
communicate. And, we're communication, everything is about communication.
Yeah,
And we're overly connected, as I was telling the lady yesterday that I interviewed. We're the therapist, we're never more connected, but never more disconnected. I mean, the
that's right.
reason we can do this is because of connection and technology.
Right.
And you and I, because we're like the same version of,
It's
you
weird.
know, so it's like, but, so we can appreciate that and appreciate the value that it's adding to that because we look
Right.
for connection in everything we do. But
Yes.
then there's a whole world out there who, you know, are just so blatantly blind, like almost like they have horse blinders on. Maybe they
That's it.
want to be disconnected. They
Yep.
don't want maybe they want it to be viral. Maybe they want this or that, but they're
Yeah.
not really interested in like, well, how are you? Because my
Right.
podcast is about exploring the person next to you, like the men of
Agreed.
the house, the men of the Waffle House. You're sitting at a counter. We're already at the same place, so we know we have good taste and like the same things. So what's your story? What's my
Yeah.
story? let's just have a chat here while we talk about it and or while we eat our breakfast. And it's, but some people just don't have that. It's so very superficial, and I
Right.
don't
And
know
it's,
why. I don't know if it's something like we're ingrained with, or like if
that's a
that
good
too is
question.
kind of learned, nurtured, if it comes from
To be
because
honest, I do believe in nature versus nurture, and I think that has a lot to do with it as well. You again, you are a product of your raising and your environment. Now, of course, a lot of us you can obviously stray.
yeah,
No one is saying that, you are going to be exactly where you were raised. You're going to be, from, for example, I come from the Bronx and, I was moved out when I was a teenager because it was getting worse in the areas that I was in. But even then, I have a lot of friends who are still over there that I've known my entire life. They're not in jails. They didn't get,
yeah,
they didn't have whatever they weren't all on drugs. I mean, all the things that the tropes people would think,
mm-hmm,
right? Because I even said to my father, he actually made me laugh because he says, I don't know if I'd have kept you out there if you would have been some kind of hood rat. I'm like, Dad, how my best friend, your granddaughter's godmother still lives out there. Is she a hood rat? No. He's like, and my father's born and raised in the South Bronx. You know what
right,
I mean? But it's old school thinking. It's just tropes. And it's not, you're not, when we say a product of your environment, doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna end up like the worst of your
right,
environment, right? It just means though realistically that yes, there are ingrained things that we, nature versus nurture, we get from our households. That's how I believe that. I believe that no matter how far we can stray from ideologies of the way we were raised, there's
yeah,
always going to be those questions that we ask ourselves as we get older, like, and not just questions, there's going to be the doubts that are
mm-hmm,
always in your head, no matter how much, and some people, like I said, become such overachievers, but then deep down, they're a huge overachiever because deep down they still feel like that tiny person
yeah,
that didn't think they were going to have those opportunities and they're scared and terrified to lose it. You know what I'm saying? So this is why I feel the same way, on my podcast. Mine is I laugh because I talk to men and women, but I laugh
mm-hmm,
about all kinds of I talk about all kinds of different subjects, spirituality, women's empowerment, women's health, mental health, generational traumas.
right,
I mean, um brujeria, witchy stuff, anything you could imagine. Because for me, I like the idea that there are different ideas.
yeah,
And what's funny is I was talking to my daughter yesterday about when we weren't raised with social media yet, it's like we all live the same lives. Explain that. Something like, for example, like a Latino family, something that
mm-hmm,
all Latino families would do, whether it's like cleaning the tub with Comet or something, and leave, that was what
yeah,
it was. They were cleaning with Comet in the tub, and someone said, "Why do we leave it there like it was seasoning?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I still do that." And I'm like, and I said to my daughter, "How?" It's weird. We didn't have all this stuff to share. We were all just doing the same things. How is that possible? And I think so. What's interesting is we have all so much more alike than we have different for the most
yeah,
part. And it's just about, for me, reaching out and saying, okay, explain to me not just your part. I want to know who you are. And I'd like to look at our similarities, and
yeah,
realize that you're not alone in so many of the things that we think we're
yeah.
alone in. Absolutely not.
I was thinking when we were talking about this, I had friends in high school who, like, let's say they chose some different paths or activities and got in trouble. And I was like, well, when I was thinking nature versus nurture, is it ingrained? I was like, well, why did I choose not to join them and do that? And I go, well, it was because I, at one point in time, I was trying to go to the Naval Academy before I actually joined the Navy and this and that, the other. I graduated high school a year early. Um, and I didn't want to get in trouble. I knew that would be jeopardized if I did that. But that was part of, I realized as we were talking through it that that was part of that upbringing
Yeah.
of generational thing of going like, well, I have to take the family further. And it also made me think of like, growing up as we did, our parents did the best they could.
Yeah, agreed.
They were different times. And our parents would probably deny that they did any of the things because there was no social media to document it.
Oh, my parents
But
always denied. I'm like, did you
but
live the same
yeah,
life I did?
But how do we learn that the value and what means?
Hey, have you been feeling drained? Has it been a long week? Are you searching for ways to manage your stress and find a little bit more peace? The Podcast Connection Network is here for you. We've got amazing shows on mental health, mindfulness, and all kinds of ways to live a happier, healthier life. Check out the other shows, including mine, Everything's Connected, after this episode. The link is in the description below. Now let's get back to the show.
What what means that you care for somebody is not necessarily we're forgiving these things because they showed up for us in some way. You know, like I know in the Latino culture, if I ever needed anything, I know when I needed my first laptop for my undergrad, my grandparents or everybody would chip in. And so the family shows up when it's needed and also to support you kind of if you're the person that's expected to go further and or break
Yeah,
the generational curses
that's
or
right.
do whatever was supposed to be done, what we discussed before. And we forgive some of those things and go, you know, they did the best they could. They're trying, we understand what they were trying to do, but we understood the value of showing up, and that's what love and caring means, is
Yeah,
showing up and being there. And maybe that's part of the allure of getting off the hamster wheel and
yeah,
having more free time. But it's also too, when I say like with intentions, how you show up, even if you're gonna DoorDash or Uber, if you show up with a good attitude or a shitty attitude, how you're gonna interact with the people. Um, it
yeah.
just makes it better. You know, it's my
It
favorite
does.
thing. I get to listen to a podcast while I earn money and help people and make their
I love
day.
it.
It's like, oh
I
my
love
God,
it. And I
what's
love it. The
better than
same thing when
that?
I deliver the pizzas for the pizzeria next to me. I'm like, people say it's and when I tell you it's so rare, if at all, you'll see a female pizza delivery driver, not
Yeah,
DoorDash, I see that all the time, but a pizza delivery driver, it's the for me, part of the best part is showing up at someone's house. Now I have a lot of people that obviously know me now because I've been doing it for a
yeah,
while. There's regulars. When you show up to someone's house who haven't seen you before, they're like shocked. It's like, whoa. And I'm like, yeah, because you know what? I don't want to be behind the counter. I've done the restaurant stuff. I've done all that. I don't want to be behind the counter. I am cool sitting there making boxes when I need to and running in
yeah.
and out in my car, having my time. That's my time for whatever I need to do,
You
whether
can
it's sit
think
in
through
silence.
things.
Yeah,
Yes.
whether it's sit in silence, think about what I have to do, put my music on a podcast. Sometimes I'll put on like a TV show and just have it on in the background. So I'm listening to something depending upon the distance I'm driving,
Yeah.
things like that, and I appreciate that time. And it's the same thing with DoorDash. I think I did like 5 hours yesterday, and and I kept saying, you know what, I'm gonna extend it because I'm enjoying this time.
Yeah.
And, it was busy. I was not just sitting around. I was enjoying the time to do so because it gave me some time to also just be me. You know what I mean? And just
Yeah.
relax. Because sometimes in your own house, you don't always get that chance. You want to try to. You want to hope that you do, but you don't always get that chance because it's like sometimes as parents, it's not till 11 o'clock at night. You're getting some peace and quiet in your house. And at that point, I'm falling asleep on the couch.
Last one up
Like,
first. Last one out, first one up.
just about
And I
99%
mean,
of the
it's
time.
almost okay that I suffer from insomnia because I've needed it many a days.
And when you get
But
to a certain age, insomnia is inevitable. I don't care what anybody
yeah,
says because
I wear a Whoop band and I track the sleep, and I can actually get a couple of days of maybe like 100% sleep.
mm,
But if you start to look at the trends, it's always followed by like then dips. Like I had two 100% nights, and then last night I ended up going and getting tattoo for Friday the 13th, one that my daughter
oh,
wanted me to get, and then 13 on the dice because
wow,
they're
very
Friday the
cool.
13th, and I had to
Yeah.
wait because it was packed. But I got to talk
Oh,
to people
really?
about
I
my
wouldn't have thought about that,
podcast.
but makes sense.
Yeah, because they were doing $13 tattoos.
Oh
Yeah.
man, if I mean you're not near here, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't
And
even have thought to look around for
but I
something
think
like
it's a
that.
thing everywhere probably because it was Friday the 13th. Some were
Damn, I
doing
missed that.
$31. Like they charged me 30 for one and then um 13 for the other. Shout out Franklin Tattoo and Flint in case they hear it or listen to it. And Christian was the artist. It's very good. But yeah, you know, I waited a lot but it was and so I went to bed, you know, I didn't get out of the chair till after midnight and I got
Mm.
home and I was jacked up and still hadn't eaten in like 7 hours. And so I ate and watched some TV and wound down and was 2:30 when I went to bed, and I set my alarm for 10 to get up and kind of prepare and do the things I need to do to be where I need to be so we can do
Yeah.
this. And um, I got up earlier than expected and felt good enough. But you know that my sleep trend will go like 100, like
And
65, 55. And then I had like one night, it was like 16%, 1% recovery. But
Yep.
then it was 100. And, you know, sometimes it's like, I don't know if it's a good thing. I would like to be more consistent.
I think we
That would
should.
be better for me,
Yeah.
but I'm working on it. But sometimes it can be like a superpower. Like when, you know, the nights that led up when my daughter was sick and she came in at 3 in the morning and she had temperature and I needed to get her an appointment and
Right.
all these
Life,
different
just
things.
life. Life is
I
gonna
was
life.
up and I
Yes.
gave her Tylenol. She took a nap and I worked on podcast stuff because I was up at 3:30 in the morning and I'm like, why not? And you know, what I've learned too is I think part of the life of living many different things and that flexibility is to be flexible and use it to your advantage. You know, if you
Right.
can't sleep, then do
Be
something you need
productive.
to do. Yeah, be
Be
productive,
productive.
read a
Yeah.
book, do something, especially as parents, do
Yeah.
something you never have the opportunity to do because you're getting interrupted
Yeah.
or
All the time. All the time. You know, last night after I did DoorDash all those hours and I kept pushing it out, I didn't get home till after 12 midnight. And I had eaten dinner. Like I had ordered
uh,
some food for the kids, some, crappy food that I didn't really want to eat, but it was delicious. I ate that before I left. I said, I'm good for the night. I'm good.
yeah.
This was at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I was like, I'm good for the night. But now I've been running around for like how many hours? I get home after 12. My daughter's watching TV. I sit down to watch some TV with her. You said your chair, it made me laugh. I was like, I got my chair. I was like, I want my chair. I was like, before I get ready to go to bed. And next thing you know, I'm like, I'm hungry.
Yeah.
Oh, there's leftover pizza and wings. Well, guess what mommy's gonna have?
Oh.
12 something at night, 12, almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Am I nuts? Like did I think I was gonna be
I had
hungry?
Chick-fil-A sandwich my wife had brought me at
See,
1:30 in the morning.
there you go. It's one of those things that you're kind of like, okay, next thing I know, I'm passed out on the couch. I wake up at 5:40 in the morning.
Oh,
Now I'm like, well, all right, let me wash up and get ready and go to bed. Actually go to bed. I go in my room. My son is passed out in my bed. So now I'm like, all right. So I just push him out the way and he gets to the other side and try. But now I'm like wide awake. I'm like, well, that's great. I technically slept like 3 hours, which almost is a full night's sleep for me at
yeah.
least some days. And you're kind of just like, well, do I get out of bed and do something? Like, I really could get out of bed and exercise. And then I said, by that point, I can exercise, shower, and then go back and lay down for a couple of hours. And my brain
Yeah.
was like, yeah, that's not happening.
But
And
if
I
you
just
wanted to,
laid
you
there.
could.
But if I wanted to, I could. So
It's
it's like,
choice.
that's right. It's all about in that moment finding the
And
best way to maximize either your productivity or take the rest you need. I
almost
think
being
the
able to
rest.
honor it. The other day, the electricity went out here 3 times, but once in the morning and once in the afternoon, but extended period in the morning, like hour and a half, and then an hour and a
Oh,
half in the
wow.
afternoon. And in the middle of I'm doing podcast stuff and I'm like, ugh. And so I do whatever, I get some stuff done. I think I actually read or something, but then on the second one, I had been to the gym and all this, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna get some stuff before my wife and daughter come home. Electricity goes out. I ended up taking a nap with the dog,
Oh,
and another
oh, I
reason
love
for
a nap.
100% being able to do
That's
that. And I
right.
was like, well, I was like, I could, but you know, and being able to honor that and not
I know.
be kind of confined to something, I think that's where the real, you know, I think when you said being able to choose in that moment
Yeah.
that this is what I want to do. And kind of yesterday, I got into 4 or 5 tattoo shops and they were all like, one wouldn't do the design I wanted. They said only the flash art is the special, but then they didn't have any openings. And I really had made up my mind this morning and told my daughter I was going to do it. And I said, I'm going to try one more place. And that happened to be the place. And I ran into
Right.
people I knew. I was able to talk to people about the podcast. And it was just, you know, in being able to go, hey, I didn't plan to stay up till 2:30, but I
Yeah.
did. And I woke up refreshed. And the other thing that was interesting on my Whoop was even though I only slept 5 hours, my deep sleep and my REM sleep was over 2 hours. It was almost half
Yeah.
of my total sleep, which is like super optimal.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, probably not super optimal. Somebody will hear this and go, no, it's probably, but there are some nights that I get more sleep, but less deep sleep. And it's so
Yeah.
crazy that sometimes I
That's why
can
you wake
sleep
up more
less.
tired. That's why you
Yeah.
wake up more tired throughout the day. That's exactly it. I'll tell you what, I am all about a nap. I think I nap more. Get more of my sleep through
Uh-huh.
naps than I do through the nighttime because I will take between jobs between on a lunch break, whatever it is. If I'm not, I have to be knocked out a good 15-20 minutes. I'm like, I'll tell the kids I'm on the couch. If I go to my bed, it's all over. I'm not getting out. I can't be that comfortable. But that
Right.
couch, I'm like, I'll be on the couch, put up blanket, and I'm like, all right, set my watch, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever time I have. And I am telling you, some of the best sleep of my life are in naps. And I think it's just because your body's just like, you need this right now.
Yeah.
Like you have to go through the rest of your day. And that is self-care. When I was a kid, I don't remember ever taking a nap, ever, like ever.
Did anybody talk about it and did they call it that?
What do you mean?
Did anybody encourage self-care? Or did we
Oh,
even know what
no,
self-care was? Was it talked about? Because I was
no,
thinking about this.
absolutely not.
We talk about all these things, but even as a Gen Xer growing up, what was the view on therapy? Like therapy is much more wide open, and with
Yep.
technology, we have Zoom, like
Yep.
BetterHelp and all that. And so was there, when was kind of self-care even starting to come up? I
It
can't.
wasn't until recently that it became nichey
Do you think it was after or during COVID?
during COVID. I believe it became during COVID because we were all balls of anxious energy.
Well, you could
We-
realize that you could not have all the physical stressors of having to get up and go to a job, or you could still have, let's say, even if you were financially okay, whether it was through government money or like once I got laid off, it was a severance package that was
Mhm.
okay. And so I was financially okay. Um, but that you still, there was still an issue as if you were going to
Yeah.
work and not okay.
Yeah, and the reality is, that's when I believe for me specifically. Now, it's also because I've um, I've always believed, and I've always been a gym head. I love going to the gym. I love If I can't get to the gym, I love exercising. I've said it before on my podcast as well that I love it. Just one, it helps me sleep. That's for
Mhm.
sure, like deep, good sleep. But two, it makes me feel better about myself. It helps my body, that kind of thing. And so for many years, there were things that I did for myself that
Mhm.
I considered self-care. At the time, I don't think the term was a thing though. It was just
Right.
like, I'm doing what I gotta do to take care of myself. It wasn't like a term. I think what happened is, and especially for me, during COVID, it became more niche in the sense that people started to label you cannot do everything at once. Look at the world we're in right now.
Mhm.
People are getting sick and dying. And what have they done for themselves? They've worked themselves to the bone. We're all sick from, all the crap that we're eating. I
I've
mean,
been on the
the
hamster wheel forever.
hamster wheel
And
forever. Now you
nobody
got to sit
nobody
there and
ever
do
looked to see
nothing.
what it was. It's like if you could
Yes,
feed people through a hamster wheel, they don't even know what, because they're going
right.
so fast, you
You're
don't even
going
know
so
what you're putting
fast.
in.
Right. And I think so. A big part of that is having to slow down, having to have your whole family in your house at the same time. Most times it doesn't happen. Having to try to work from home and have your kids learning from home. While you have spouses that are not working and so they're working around you working. You know what I mean?
Maybe
From
we're more
the house.
disconnected because we were forced when everybody was home, they had to be quote unquote connected and it cramped their
Very
space and maybe now we're choosing to be disconnected because that was so traumatizing.
I mean, I know there's a lot of healing still going on from that. And that's going to take a
Yeah.
while, possibly a generation, if that much. We have to learn
Mm.
to do it correctly, because if not, we're going to bring that into other generations because all of our young kids live through this. Me and you have
It's
young
only
kids.
been a couple years.
It's only been a couple years. My son was a toddler. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons he's like, I'm comfortable at home. I don't want to go anywhere, because he didn't have to. He was at home. And I think in my household, for me especially, I learned that I had to practice self-care because my new marriage at the time had basically fallen apart from addiction
Mhm.
from my spouse, and it was the discovery, the trauma for me of the discovery, the self-loathing from me that that happened, and why did this happen? And I allowed myself again to fall into this, and again, the addiction wasn't me, it was my spouse. But what happens is, first of all, we all have addictions, we just don't,
Yeah,
they're
I'm
not
thinking like,
all as serious as.
where do you think that comes from? Like, you, I mean, I know you, if we're if we're very similar, you have to blame yourself, and I feel like you
Yep.
probably tried to be as understanding as
Oof.
possible and tried to help them navigate it
You got
out
it.
of love,
You got it.
and your well probably run dry until you just couldn't do it anymore. And then you're like, but then you blame yourself and you're like, I gotta learn to spot patterns or pick differently.
Oof.
And what is it about me that attracts me to these behaviors? Is it my caring nature because I'm a
Richard, get out of my head.
caring person by is who I am, not what I do?
That's
Um,
when I tell you exactly every single thing that you just said is exactly what it was. It was that spirit of me that was like, one, I could fix this. Two, I can fix him.
well, showing up is what we were taught as love.
That's it. It was like I will give all of myself to this person to help them, right? Not knowing that this person had these issues from the time 20, 30 years before me. It
Right.
just again manifested again in a pattern that I didn't know about, but it didn't matter. I had made this commitment. I was about, we are going to fix this and get through this. And I gave everything to myself and him and my family. And what I do, I made myself sick. I gained 30 pounds. I worked like a beast. I put someone through rehab. I paid all the bills. I put everything in my name, blah, 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 blah. Things that, and I'm going to speak from a woman's perspective, but things that a lot of times women do because we excuse a lot of behaviors,
Yeah.
because that's a nurturing part of
Well,
most of us.
especially as a mother.
That's it. And I didn't want to break up a family that I had willingly went into. Right. I said, I
Yeah.
could fix this. I'm like, but what did it end up doing? I ended up
It's
exactly like
almost
you
like
said.
self-exploitation
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
as designed by um the whole nature versus nurture thing. And
Yeah.
what's interesting was I've talked to a lot of women, and like the one I interviewed yesterday, and we talk about women's rights and men, why men are so kind of stuck. Women have been fighting for rights and evolving for years, while we as men have been doing the same bullshit of being the sperm donor, the whatever, the
Not as
child.
evolved, I will
Yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah. And so,
Yes.
but as we attempt to explore it, it's um, you know, I mean,
It's a lot of the time too, let's be realistic. It's the blind leading the blind, right? So you have
yeah.
generation after generation after generation of the same BS being told to boys and men as they get older. And only a
Hmm.
very enlightened male who was either lucky to one, be raised maybe by a single mother. A lot of times it takes have being a single mother to raise a little more enlightened boy because that's what they're used to. They're like, I have to understand women. Now it could go the opposite direction as well. I watch a lot of Special Victims Unit. Law and
Hmm.
Order is my favorite. So I'm not saying this is always the case. What I'm saying is though, if you're not able to be a more enlightened male,
Hmm.
and to open your eyes to see what's really going on out there, then you are not going to be able to raise another generation of an enlightened
No, it
man,
took till 2016 for women to Me Too and like get Harvey Weinstein. And what I was
Yes.
talking about in that interview yesterday was we were
Yes.
going, so kind of like how your grandmother who got divorced, how her thing was different too. Like it takes generations
Yes.
to get there, that some of these behaviors started, but it wasn't until 2016 that you start seeing where women are evolving and they're like, no more. But also I said, obviously all these men thought it was appropriate because they had learned it somewhere before or had
Yes.
been getting away with it. They were finally held accountable for it. And so now women can be CEOs and they can do this and they can do that, and they don't necessarily need men per se. Um, you can adopt children.
Right.
Same-sex couples can adopt
Yes.
children, surrogates, there's all kinds of configurations,
Right. And I
you
think,
know.
and that's a wonderful thing to me. Like, to
Hmm.
each his own, live your life, be happy, treat others with kindness,
Right.
empower one another. Like I say all the time, empower one another, because sometimes some of us didn't, and I say some of us, I didn't necessarily not, but some people didn't get that as children. We don't realize, I don't get me
Mhm.
wrong, children are stupid resilient. We understand that, we know that. But here's the thing. We believe children are resilient because they grow up and they're able to go to school, blah, blah, blah. But all those things that they see and hear still shape who they are as adults, how they conduct relationships, how they raise their kids. Half of it could be subconscious half the time. So yeah, the thought that children are resilient, that's a fantastic thought. But now look through their generations of their lives and how they've conducted their lives, how they've conducted relationships, how they conduct themselves in any natural settings, and then look back to areas of their life where they may have seen or heard certain things. I feel sometimes for my kids. My daughter was raised, it was very hard for her. She saw her mother go through a
Yeah.
lot. And it always worries me that she's going to be the complete opposite and be completely standoffish and go, I'm not going to be bothered at all. If
Because you
this
were
is
a different person 8 years ago,
exactly
as was she, but the world.
everything, everything is different. And
That was during the Me Too,
sometimes, yeah, exactly.
2016.
And sometimes it's really hard. Now that she's older, I think we and her just had a conversation about something about me she didn't know. And she said, wait a second. You never told me that. I said, because you didn't need to hear it at the time. I was like, you need to understand mommy was the same age. I made choices. I made choices at certain ages that I needed to. I said, but the only way that I could think about it is if I didn't make certain choices, you and your brother wouldn't be here.
Hmm.
I was like, that's the only way that I can sometimes think. Plus, it got me to the point at this time in my 40s and being 41 and change, where I can now see things a little more clearly and do things differently. Um, it's never too late to try to do things differently. And it's never too late to take care of yourself either.
You're almost forced to. I think and I don't know if, yeah, I definitely like some of it COVID, some of it, all this understanding and coming out of it is um this kind of self-care. But for me, like the fitness just taking on a different meaning of like, yes, I would like to always look as good as I can being older, but at the same time, you still want to be able to be active and do things with, I have a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
Um, but I also, have a 70-year-old father. I hope not to be having knee replacements, but also if I have to have them, you need to be in as good a shape as you can
Yes.
be
Yeah,
for
to
the
sustain them.
recovery.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because yeah,
Sustain
this
them.
is the
Yes.
second time I've lost over 30 pounds and it's been 20 years apart. Yeah, I was telling somebody on a different podcast, and it's so much more challenging. And
Oof.
so I have to go, okay, when I'm 68, you know, the reason at 48 all this has been such a bitch is because of the past 18 years of different things I've done. And so at 68, I want to be ahead of the game if I get to
Yeah.
make it that
Yes.
long. I do not want, because it's going to be twice as difficult as it is now.
Exponentially harder. I think about it
Yes.
every single day. I'm like, I am getting to a time in my
What kind
life
of
where,
grandparent do you want to be?
right. And you realize, like, all of a sudden I realized yesterday, I was telling a coworker, one of the women that I went to school with, high school with, and graduated with, she just became a grandparent yesterday. And she just had her, and I all of a sudden realized, I was like, oh my God,
Oh, yeah.
I am at that age. I could be a grandmother. And all of a sudden it was like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. It's not something I thought about before because I'm just trying to, I'm raising kids and I got a young kid, but you don't realize that's
Oh,
my mother was 42.
do
You
you,
know what I
did
mean?
you,
When
do
she
you
became
think
a
about,
grandmother.
but do you think about, as a single woman, do you go, oh man, what kind of wrench is that going to throw in the dating profile of going, when
Oh,
you have to say I'm a grandmother, now it's kind of a labeling term, but it's not that odd if you think about it like mathematically, culturally, and
yeah.
whatever.
20 years,
But
20, at least 20 plus. Yes.
yeah, but our
Yeah.
views, our views of what grandparents should be because when I was calling people grandma, they weren't going to the gym, they weren't doing a podcast, they weren't Ubering.
They were looking like the Golden Girls. That was very different. It was a different time. Like we are not, we're looking at each other now. And I laugh
Yeah,
when I tell you I've had this conversation just recently. I always say it's all the preservatives that we ate in the 80s and 90s. It was all that fake food they gave us because we all look damn
ecto
good in our
cooler.
40s and 50s.
Saw the Tang I
All
drank.
the Tang we drank, all of the crap that was in the boxes, any kind of colored nonsense they put in the bodegas we were eating.
Convenience. And you know what it was?
Yeah.
It's like the homemaker was such a thing in that time frame. And then it was like, we need to give the homemakers a rest. Let's make it more convenient. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, we don't have to be homemakers anymore. Hey, we can jump on the hamster wheel too. I love the
Yep.
thing about equality. Like if women want to be CEOs, I think that's great. To know my daughter can have all three of them. We have a 21, a 20, and no 22, 20, and 10-year-old that they can do what they want to do,
Yes, that's right.
you know? And so, but yeah, it's,
It,
we have to make sure that the reasoning is right.
you had asked about, that's funny about saying something like being a grandmother in the dating world. You're right, because when I think about my grandmother, one of both of them actually, wow, were single as long as I knew them. They died 20 years ago, 20 something years
Uh-huh.
ago. Very young, unfortunately, but both of them. But as long as I knew them my entire life, they were they weren't out there. Although maybe my mother's mother, because she was a nice little party girl, but that's my spirit. She's my spirit angel, and she's with me all the time. But which is funny, actually, of all people, I laugh that she's with me because we kind of like kindred spirits. But what's funny is like I never saw it. Both my grandparents, my
Uh-huh.
grandmas, I never saw them out there dating and going out and even talking about men. And they were very different than our generation now. And I think but now when I think about that pool,
Hmm.
you know, it's a rough one. It's a rough one out there. It's not one that I thought I would be in, to be honest with you. That's why I got married. You know what I mean? Like you're kind of just like, that's the point. So you kind of get thrown into these things. And I spent the last probably year and a half really immersed on and off in that environment, whether it was online, meeting
Hmm.
people in person, whatever the case may be. I was in a situationship for almost a year kind of thing, back and forth. And I was like, just the past couple months, I was like, what the hell? I was like,
I
you know
don't know,
what?
but think of
What
your
the
life,
hell?
like, well, think of the kind of the flexibility, like, but that's the thing is like you've we have discovered that this is a whole different way to live life outside of what is normal. And so like when you said situationship, it's like, well, if that works for you at the time, I used to, as a manager, call it like, let's say you get an employee that doesn't stay very long, but they were really good and they did okay when they were there. And, some people will be like, well, we're going to be short again. You're going to have to hire again, blah, 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 blah. Isn't there more you can do? Can you do this? Well, I judge it on, was this person valuable when we needed them? We needed somebody. They came in, they did the
Exactly.
job, but my job is to help them get to wherever their next place is, even if it's not with us. And so, like, as a relationship, it's like, well, even if it's not with you, you're serving a purpose, you're
That
learning
is an incredible analogy because
connection.
that's exactly what it is. It's kind of like, when you both need it at that time. And I think
Hmm.
it's sometimes, which would happen in this case, is you kind of realize, okay, I think I've outgrown it, right? It's kind of like
Yeah.
I've outgrown it. Now I'm like, I'm more comfortable being just with me at the moment, you know what
Hmm.
I mean? And not feeling like I have some kind of emotional baggage. Because no matter what it is, you're gonna get emotionally. Most people, I mean, I give it to
Well,
people that don't get
but the
emotionally
difference
attached need to
is
go to therapy.
you're very much into growth, self improvement,
That's it.
navigating, getting better, doing better. If that other person is not and they're not aligned with you, then
Exactly.
you're going to outgrow, because like you said, there's always going to be, especially if you're at a grandparent age. I mean, I'm 48. I could be, you know,
You you
I'll be,
you could be
yeah.
too.
And so it's one of these things of going, you know, if both people aren't committed to working on themselves and that personal growth, then it is very difficult to be together and make it work because you kind of have to understand those boundaries of going, hey, look, then it's not absolutely nuts. Like if you're like, "Hey, I need to spend a little time together. Like, I go to therapy, I journal, I do this, I'm working on myself. I need a little me time.
Yeah,
Um, then you're not crazy off like, oh, I think they're seeing another person automatically is where your mind goes because
it
you're also
does.
in this different space of like, and even if they were, I'm not going to stop it. I need to continue to work on me because regardless of this person, their contribution, their connection, I have to make sure myself and those around me that I have the responsibility of are okay.
Yeah, it's true. And that's a lot of what it is. I spent again the last year and a half kind of me, I would say even sowing my wild oats, I guess you
Hmm.
could say. Um, Only one other time in my life had I been single, and that was for about 9 months. And when I say single, I mean just not in a relationship, not necessarily married
Right.
or anything, just by myself, me and my daughter. And that was only one time that I was without a boyfriend or whatever. And that was 9 months of my life 10 years ago. And then just recently I was like, okay, well, I'm kind of over sowing the wild oats too.
Yeah.
I'm kind of over. I'm like, yeah, I don't mind going out and having a good time. And if it was fine, if someone wants to take me out, let's go. Other times I have gotten to the point that even that, I'm like, you know what I want to do? Stay home and enjoy the rent I pay.
But part of it is like, it's finding that happy medium of going like, you know, if you every year, if you overdo it on Thanksgiving dinner, you're gonna feel like shit.
Yep.
But it's like until you reach that point and you've had enough and you're like, I don't need to feel that way anymore. It's not
Yeah.
worth it.
Yep.
Then,
Yeah.
it's the same way that you
You know,
can then adjust and find the sweet spot. And,
right.
maybe now in the 40s, you're able to, pivot a little faster or
Right.
adjust and recover and, not go overboard so much that, you put yourself in a situation that you don't need.
And I've been more vocal about it.
Hmm.
I've always been obviously a vocal person, and relationships I've always been
Puerto
a vocal
Rican, my
person.
my wife's her ex-husband is Puerto Rican, and so
Thing.
the 21, the 22, and the 20-year-old are from reverse marriage. So we've been together. I've known them since they were 2 and 3.
Since they were babies. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but they're all Puerto Rican, and so
And we are
yeah,
a very verbose people,
yes, absolutely,
and and even then there are still things that and I say we as a people, but we as people in general,
hmm,
and me especially, I don't say everything I'm thinking all the time. I don't know how, I don't want to always rock the boat. When you're in a
yeah.
relationship, you don't always want to say the things that you're thinking until sometimes things come out that you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that came out.
Do you think some of it's processing time too, is now that you're
Yes.
more aware and you understand your emotions more and you're like, okay, maybe I haven't had the nutrition this
Right.
XYZ is also going on.
Right.
Am I being, am I giving it a fair chance? Am I thinking through it appropriately? If I overshoot this, it could be this, and maybe I'll sleep on it kind
And a
of a
lot of it is
thing.
triggers too, right? Because here's the thing, healing is not linear, right? Healing is a lifelong process. You're not just, because every relationship, every person you meet, they're going to test different parts of you, regardless, good or bad.
Yeah.
Anybody, it could be someone in passing, it could be somebody embedded into your life. It doesn't matter. They are going to test some part of you that's going to either do one of two things. It's either going to allow you to continue your healing and say, whoa, I see that now I'm evolved enough. I see how that bothered me. Now I'm going to process it. Or you're going to not realize and you're going to fall back to those old patterns again. For me, I've gotten to the point that now I'm like, okay, I've had one or two that like, oh, they're very pushy and I want a relationship and and I'm saying to myself, do I really? I don't know that I want that right now, and I've had to then say, too much. But back in just even a couple years ago, even if I wasn't married at the time, I probably would have been like, oh my God, somebody wants to be in a relationship. That's now I'm like, ugh, I'm not ready for that kind of thing. And
Wow.
I don't want, and I'm also to the point that I'm like, I'm also good. You know what I mean? Like I'm
Yeah.
okay doing my thing. And there was this one very nice and for example, this happened to me a couple months ago. This is one really nice guy that he hits me up. I was on Facebook dating for a day, one day, and I closed that sucker real quick because it was like ridiculous. And but he hits me up, nice guy, whatever. And then I find out he had been just out of rehab. He did not have a car. He was living off of some severance and payments for years that he had from a job. And it was one thing after another, boom, boom. And we talked for a little bit, and then he was like, oh, well, he's like, why don't you come work from home from my place? And I was like, well, where do you live? And he was like, oh, so he found out he's about a half an hour from me. I said, well, why don't we just meet up? I was like, you can come this way. Oh, no, I don't have a car.
Ah.
I was like, so now I'm like, everything that
And
this
you're
dude
like, well,
did,
order a pizza from
everything.
here. And he's
Yes.
like, I don't have a job.
Yes, every single thing that he said triggered me. I was like, oh my God, this was like
I can't
this was like
fix
hanging out with
this. You're
my
like,
ex. I can't do nothing about this. I'm like, and back in the day, and I would have said to myself, you could fix this dude. Oh, he's gonna want to change for you and he's gonna get a
but
job.
there's your proof that there's your proof that, you've kind of addressed that whole, that side of going,
That
all the
needy
questions you
side.
asked yourself of what is attracting to me to these
Yes.
people, because the moment that came in, you were like, oh no.
And I told him, I said, I can't be involved with you in any way because you trigger me. I don't think you're a bad person. And I think your issues are your issues. God bless you. I wish you a happy, healthy life. I'm not to be in it though. I was like, simple as that. I'm not to be in it.
And then
Um,
you should have said it in Spanish.
I know,
And
right?
then at the end you go,
And
Marque
that would have worked
ocho.
too.
And you go,
That would have worked with him too, to be honest with you, right? But it was, I was very honest. I'm like, you trigger me. Can't do it. Can't do it. So I think with self-care also comes
mm-hmm.
self-awareness. And self-awareness is something a lot of people don't have. And to me, for those who don't know, to me, what I think of self-awareness is basically your standing in the earth, on the planet, is who you are and being aware of your self, your triggers, your vices, your fears.
Would
So
you
you're
even
this,
be trying to date if you were in that situation? If those were the cards you had to play?
I know the
Or
aud-
would you be trying to get yourself out of that hole
I
and
can't
get a
even
better hand
imagine
of
what he would be
cards?
looking for. Yeah. I
Yeah,
can't
because I
imagine what he was
mean,
looking for.
did you ever ask yourself that question? You're like, as a
I did.
self-thought and go like, well, man, like I wouldn't even be thinking about dating if
Yep.
I were had
Yep.
this set of circumstances.
Yeah. I actually asked him, I said, now, just because of my own ignorance, I don't know. I said, when you're out of rehab, for example, and I'm talking like you went
Don't they
away
tell
to
you like
rehab,
don't
don't
for a
they say for like
year?
a year? That's
Yeah.
exactly, I said, for like a year, aren't you not supposed to date or go to get in a relationship? And he was like, yeah, but I'm just looking for someone to hang with. I'm like, oh no, we're not wasting my time. Absolutely not. I don't know what I want, but it is not this. And sometimes you have to be what some may perceive as bitchy,
Yeah.
right? To get your point across. You can be very educated about it, very diplomatic about it. Not everybody's going to take it that way. He actually very much was, because he came back. He says, I would not want to do anything that would trigger you. I completely understand. Thank you for telling me. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe for him, that was a wake up call. Maybe he realized, wow, I'm not going to get any good women, if I got this
Yeah.
situation,
Well, I
I don't
mean,
know.
or he's going to repeat his pattern. You didn't fall into the pattern. Then he's
Yes.
going to repeat his and find somebody who's codependent and they can feed each other's addiction. And
And that used to be me,
yeah.
and like I said, when I talk my podcast, these are the things I love to talk about because we always feel one, and we're going to, and even not just relationally, but culturally,
Hmm.
we are told, do not talk your business. Do not, nobody needs to know what goes on
Well,
in your
as a woman
household.
in your 40s, a single mom, what do you find attractive? Like somebody who's, if
Mm.
somebody came to you and said, "Hey, like I have a bit of a fucked up past, but I'm do this to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is that more attractive to you now at your age, in terms of like what are you seeing, what are you looking for versus, is it, what is it more security or you can do it yourself as a single mom, so that don't have to be a thing. So it's
Mm,
kind of like you don't necessarily need a man, so kind of what you find attractive or sexy has to be way different.
it
So
does.
what is that? What are you looking
Um,
for?
that's an interesting question because I think it really depends on the situation, right?
Hmm.
So for me, one of the things that I find attractive is someone who, yes, I have a fucked up past. We all do. We all
Right.
have pasts that when you're at this age, there is nothing that you listen, nobody has a clean past, right? Some of us just have more dramatic and traumatic ones than others.
We all listened to Milli Vanilli. We were
Yeah,
all duped. There was no internet during that
yeah.
time, and we were still
Yes.
all doing the same shit.
We were,
So,
yes, all living the same parallel lives until
yeah,
the shift somewhere in
yeah,
2005 or something.
yeah.
But so for me, it's about one, yes, honesty.
Hmm.
Come to me from a place of I am extremely educated and I'm okay taking care of my kids on my own, right?
Right.
So don't come at me with no bullshit. I cannot stand a man that tries those corny ass lines that, I'm like, dude,
Unless it's funny and he turns
oh
out
no,
to be, unless
listen,
he turns out to be funny and you strike up a conversation
I
and he was
am
just trying to be
one.
humorous.
But that's exactly it. For me, it's about laughter, fun,
Yeah.
right? Being able to play off each other, be able to talk about things like music in common and movies
Hmm.
and sports. I love all those things and knowing that if they have kids that they're a good father. See, to
Yeah.
me, don't come at me with you got a bunch of kids, but you don't know how to pay your child support or you don't know how to be there for your kids take and be active in their lives because guess what,
Yeah.
I struggle with exes that
There's a difference of paying child support and being present.
yes and do not so don't come at me if you got that situation because guess what, I don't need another child in my household, right? Like that kind of
Mm.
thing. There are moments that I miss having someone else lie with me, you know what I mean, and at
Right.
the end of the day say, hey babe, we got this, of course. But I think we that's part of the reason a lot of us stay in relationships longer than we should
Hmm.
because we know we're going to miss that. And yeah, I definitely do. But until I find somebody who, one, it needs to be financially stable, and I don't mean to pay my bills,
Right.
don't get me wrong. If you're gonna join my household, you're gonna join that. But where that's way far. That's not,
Right.
I don't even know if
But
that's gonna
you don't
happen.
need to take care of anyone
But
else.
I am tired of putting things in my name and taking care of people that I'm the one that gets screwed.
Yeah.
I need to know that guess what? You can take care of your stuff. I can take care of my stuff. And if at any point things should join in between, God bless it. You know what I mean? That's a whole nother
Right.
issue. I just want to have fun. I want to laugh. I want someone who makes me feel comfortable,
Hmm.
someone who I could be myself around, good or bad.
Right.
Someone who says you don't need makeup, you be you, and that's it. And I think as I get older, it gets simpler just because it's more about companionship
Hmm.
than about anything else. I mean, if I was to fall in love again, that would be amazing. That would be absolutely amazing. But I think I got to the point that I'm like, it could happen. I'm not old, right?
No, no.
But
Well, things are so much different, and like we were saying. I mean, I'm 48, and I don't look like the 48-year-olds that when I was 10.
right. If I thought of getting married again, I don't know about all that. I'm still legally, technically married because that not being that is
Yeah,
expensive too.
but
You
those
know what
are
I'm saying?
all different, like kind of things I think that are still
Yeah. And now that I'm
challenged.
and now that I look at it, I'm like, all those things really aren't even, it's just such a different world.
Yeah,
Each
yeah.
his own, to each family his own. Certain things are necessary. Sometimes now people think certain things are not necessary. I don't
It's like
know.
being trapped in an old system. It's like old laws that get amended. I mean,
Yeah.
how many people went to prison for weed and now it's legal?
Now it's
Some that
legal.
ruined their whole lives.
I remember
Maybe
running from the
they.
cops as a teenager in a car because you had a blunt on you.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And parking in the woods to smoke your blunt. When now it's like people are doing it with the cops sitting right next to them in a car, and you're like, what just happened here? And we're talking a 20-year difference. You know what I mean? If that much.
So if you miss the, one of the things you miss is that person lying next to you, like, hey, we got
Sometimes.
this. Um
Sometimes.
what
So glad you're tuned in. Did you know that this podcast, as well as my own, are part of a much larger world called the Podcast Connection Network? We have some pretty amazing shows hosted by even more amazing souls just waiting to be discovered. Curious? Head over to the link in the description below. You won't be disappointed. Curious? Head over to the link in the description below. You won't be disappointed.
where do you draw some of that connectivity that would be that from? Whether it be like, are you part of any women's groups? Is it interviews and podcasts? Do you um, have close with family? Are you a affectionate person with those that you are friends with, that y'all hug and it's
Yeah.
appropriate and okay,
Yeah.
culturally and on a friendship level,
All of the above, I would say, because yes, we were always, one, I'm very blessed. I have such an amazing support system. I have my sister, I have my prima hermanas, which we're extremely close, always have been. I have my parents, thank God. I have a couple close girlfriends that I've known since we're kids. I have my kids, so I have a very, very, I'm very blessed to have an extremely tight systems that we are there for each
Mhm.
other daily, all day, every day. We are on the phones, with each other, whether it's through memes or whatever it is, like always. And I'm very blessed with that. Being raised to, I mean, we didn't have the most overtly affectionate
Right.
parents. It just wasn't a thing. And I think as I got older, I craved that more. And I looked for it in places I shouldn't have. I've discussed that even on my podcast as well. I made a lot of choices as a teenager and as I got older where I looked for that affectionate
Mhm.
person or someone to be affectionate with me because I didn't really, really get that fill. I try to be sometimes I'm overtly affectionate with my children. I'm like, come here, come sit with mommy. And and I
Yeah.
grab my kids and they'll be like, mommy. And I'm like, and I'm like, I love you, I love you, because I want us to be open and understand that that comes from a deep, deep place of
One
it's
day it'll be gone.
yeah,
Or,
it's
I mean,
us.
if
I
your
never want
daughter
them
goes
to
to college
feel
2 years away or 2 hours
yes,
away or something, I mean, we
yes,
understand it's limited,
yes, I never want them to feel
that
that
they
they have
lack
to look,
that.
yes, and that they have to look for it elsewhere. It's because the reality is you also have to find it in
Mhm.
yourself. So for me, yes, there are moments and through the podcast as well. I have been very blessed that anybody that I've talked to on my podcast for whatever reason have been stories of struggle and redemption,
Yeah.
have been stories of empowerment, have been stories of how I took my life back, have been stories of this is what I
Do
do.
you talk to your kids about self-love?
Oh my God, all the
Well,
time.
because the thing is I don't know, and I feel like it was very similar. It might have been in that podcast, but that I listened to of you.
The
The
healthy, the
best
healthy.
the best way to show up for your kids is to show up for yourself because they're gonna see you. It's
Yes,
not necessarily about saying that. And so, besides talking about it on a podcast and even talking about the struggles, so your kids one day can listen to it and go, "Hey, I know, but I know my mom practiced it and
yes,
she was the example."
yes,
Um, is that kind of something you try to get across, and do you talk to them about kind of that topic and love
I
of
do.
self?
I do. As a matter of fact, every morning, 98%, depending upon how the morning goes,
Hmm.
I will look at my son. And on the way to school, we do what we call our affirmations, not affirmations,
Okay.
affirmations. And one of the very last ones is, I am loved. He says, Papa Dios loves me,
Hmm.
and I love myself. Because I want him and my kids to always know that self-love and self-care is by far one of the most important things that you can do for yourself, because if you cannot be yourself, you cannot be for others. Simple as that. And it's something that I have learned. I always took away from myself to give others. But if I wasn't doing for myself, all I was doing was draining and letting other people drain this energy from me. And I wasn't my best self. I'm still not my best self. We have moments, we have days
Yeah.
We're constantly progressing
seasons,
seasons. There are times
growth.
that we don't feel as good as other days and so on
Yeah,
and so forth. And there are days that we could be great and then something happens and boom, you're triggered and you're like, oh, that's it, and it could take you in a spiral. So it's all evolution, progression, growth. All of that is really important. And I try to explain that to my kids. Look, one day at a time, all you can do. If Papa Dios, God gave you life, say thank you for that breath. Thank you for waking me up. Now I have another day to try to get it right. To try to do right, to try to do better for
yeah.
myself, try to learn something and use that. And again, because I am constantly someone who is working on this every day, I want them to always have it in the back of their heads. I always tell my kids, when mommy's not here anymore, you're going to hear my voice
I say, you
in
know
their
what? I
head.
go when I first started the podcast and I felt all the ways you feel when you start a podcast and you're trying to be helpful and open and vulnerable and it feels
Yep.
uncomfortable. It was like that understanding of one day I'm not going to be here. And I don't care how embarrassed I feel about saying this on an airwave, whatever you want to call it, the interwebs, that if I'm gone for whatever reason, God decides it, that I would give my last breath for my child.
Yeah.
So if he needs it, she needs it, then there's going to be a place that will be here. She can hear me, listen to me,
Yeah.
understand the challenges, understand what I thought at my core, what I valued, maybe why I am the way I am. And like I was telling other people, like, hey, I have pictures of my great grandparents, but I've never heard them speak.
Mm,
This medium is also recording history. The way we used to have photo albums and store them in attics,
that's a
and
fantastic point.
you know, we're now recording history that, my grandkids can be like, oh, this was my grandfather.
Yeah. It's
He
amazing.
was about this. Oh, this is how our family. So my mother still works in healthcare. I'm 48. She's been doing that since I was 10, so 38 years. Um, I did healthcare. My wife did healthcare. My daughter was born when we were both working healthcare. And so it's like, I always said, hey, it kind of runs in the family. It's a
Yeah.
family business in the way. And I was
Yeah.
like, um, you know, whether it's groceries, whether it's whatever, podcasting, it's, oh, this is how my family got into this.
Right.
Used to, we read about stories of immigration and how
Yeah.
recipes got here. And, some people didn't have choices, but some people did physical labor
Yeah.
because that's what they could do, or they could do dock work because
Right.
they were immigrants. Um, and so it also is this timestamp for this part of history, and hopefully it carries over in the clouds somewhere, that when we're
Yeah.
gone, these lessons, these histories, and not only is it about my story, but every guest I have on that has a story,
Right.
and all the people that they've touched and how that lives on and what people
Yeah.
can learn and gain value, because it's all about adding value. I just had to shift my
Right.
identity and go, well, if I'm a caring person, I'm just going to do it for, I can reach so many more people doing this than I can managing 2 clinics. And
Yeah.
really, if I'd gone up the ranks, you become more kind of detached because your picture gets bigger and
Yes.
you're almost touching less people in a way.
Yeah.
Because you're more out of touch with what goes on a daily basis, because you're looking at spreadsheets and worried about funding
Right.
and how many days cash on hand and
Right. I agree. And I think one of the reasons that I started my podcast, and I started it with one of my best girlfriends, and
uh-huh.
it's a lot of work and life is gonna life. And I was like, all right, you know what? I'm gonna try and do it myself. And I call it, and I've said it on so many other podcasts, was my labor of love,
Yeah.
because I don't know how long I'll be able to continue, 'cause it's been 2 years.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, you know what I mean? And they grow very slowly, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and it's a lot of 21st century stuff that I'm like, oh my goodness. And I'm like, and I can talk for 16 days. If I had a team, I will
Mm.
quit my job and I will do it every day. I would love
Maybe
it.
go
You
with
know what I
less
mean?
editing. I found so much when I went to less editing.
Very possibly, very possibly. So it's a lot of it's a lot of work, but part of the reason I have decided to continue it, whether it's if I have to take a break in between, whatever the case may
Yeah.
be, is because exactly towards what you're saying. I know, and I've had people tell me that there is worth in it. There has been people have said, wow, I heard this and I realized, oh my goodness, I didn't think about it that way before. Or oh, I have, someone who is like would take notes and bring them to her therapist. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's crazy. I wouldn't even have thought of that, right? Because these conversations are not just about us as single people.
Mm-hmm.
These are problems, issues, generational traumas, things that are passed on through, to our kids and so on and so forth, that a lot of us don't even know that we have. And it's not until you know that you have it and can look into it, can you heal it, or can you start to heal the,
Yeah.
heal the journey. And a lot of our parents, a lot of grandparents, whoever may be still around, may not always be that, about that journey. Sometimes they're like, oh, you're just being too dramatic. You're fine. You're just you know what, get over it. You were a kid, get over it. But it's not about that. It's educating
Well,
yourself
it's like
on
podcasting. What gets you here won't get you to the next level. And
right,
so putting our grandparents to the view, put your heads in the sand and do what they did and just
right.
continue to do that is not gonna.
It's not going to take exactly. It's not going to take you to the next level.
Mm-mm.
And you had asked me, and it made me think about this too with the podcast about, um, what makes me sometimes miss having somebody beside me, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And a lot of the reason I had started the podcast too, when I did, was actually at the lowest time for me during when stuff had went down in my own
Yeah.
household during COVID. And it was a way for me to speak my truth.
Hmm.
Um, it was like me having a journal,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I have my journal anyway, of
It's a,
course,
I do too. It's
but it was but it
a
was a
verbal
way for
account of
me.
events.
Exactly. And it was a way for me to say, I need some direction. I
Hmm.
need to understand where this comes from. I
Oh
need to
my
understand
God. I have an
where,
episode just like that. It goes, I needed something to do, something. I was so fucking lost. I just needed something to do on a weekly basis to hold me accountable to something.
yes. And it's
And the focus.
exactly. And to focus and to say, okay, I'm speaking to somebody who not only understands, but can tell me, oh my God, I've gone through this too, or I can see what you're talking about and realize and help me through that journey. So yeah, there are times, I do miss having somebody because I've had to spend so much of my life because of these journeys in what they call, your masculine, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to be more in my feminine. And that's exhausting.
Oh, I could
So
imagine.
yeah, it's exhausting having to be the
Well,
to constantly
being a
take
woman
care
is
and do everything.
hard anyway. Like I just listened to a podcast the other day and it was kind of a semi-political one, but the point of it was, talking about women voters and what do they want to offer women. And he said safety. It was JD Vance on the
Safety. Oh,
Sean Ryan show. And then in the conversation I had with the therapist, I think we brought up kind of that similar her acronym of STRONG, which is her book. Safety is creating this safe environment. And so, as a woman, a single woman, I could imagine like not only the safety of the world, is somebody going to take advantage of me? I can't,
mm,
or if you live in a place that's where crime is high and you can't walk through the park, your own neighborhood, because there's
yeah.
gang activity, and then you got to worry about your kids with that. So, just from a woman's perspective, you're already like in a state of overwhelm.
Yeah.
And then you got to be a single mom and all these other things
Yeah.
and deal with it. And it's like
Yeah.
hella exhausting.
And you always have to try to protect yourself. You don't know who you're meeting. You don't know how their actual intentions. You don't know. Now now you have to navigate, okay, at some point, I've known this person for how long? Am I gonna allow them around my kids? I haven't gotten to that point yet. I have no interest in getting to that
Yeah.
point. But
Yeah.
that does happen. Obviously, that we know that that happens, So there is so
Or when
many.
are you gonna attend a grandparents' lunch
Yeah.
together?
Oh God, right? Things like that, You got some now at an older age, and I say older meaning like same
Yeah.
generation as me, but even in the,
Mhm.
40s, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, I've been there, done that. I'm not looking for a relationship." And I'm just like, so I'm like, I'm not necessarily looking for a relationship either, but I also doesn't mean that I can't trust you, right? You don't know who you
Right.
can even trust anymore,
Well,
right?
but there's,
So it's really a scary
relationships
situation.
are many forms. I mean, it's almost even in the time frame of the podcast, we're having a relationship. It's just
Yeah,
a different one. It's
just a
not
different
an,
one.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a different type.
yeah,
It's on a friendship and a professional,
that's right.
and and it kind of evolves. And I think it can take shape. And when you brought up that kind of trust thing, that was like, you know, it's not always length of time. I mean, you know, what happens? You pull up on a wreck and there's somebody else there calling 911, and they say, or hey, you call 911, and they're already doing compressions, and you do that, and you help, and you realize, oh, we both worked as a team, and a sense was developed right there in that moment
Yeah,
due to distress. And
yeah.
so it does not have to be, um, and that could be probably part of a trauma bond, but in a way, it's like,
I would think that
I
one does have a little bit of trauma bond to
but
it.
I talk about like intention. It's like, part of me, the reason I even use that example is because I worked 6 years in a level one trauma
Yeah,
center.
yeah,
But knowing how short life is, um, knowing all these things is what's led me to have some of the views that I
yeah.
have, like about being kind, but also some of the views of like when you said trust. And it's not necessarily a link thing. It's but also as an Uber driver, Door Dasher, you're like, you can be helpful just out there doing your thing. I mean, you might be sitting in a parking lot and see a crash or
Mm-hmm.
something, or you have no idea, or
Yeah.
you could see somebody fall. What if it was bad weather? I
Yep.
mean, you never know when your opportunity to be helpful is. And I remember I had a moment where it was like this, and I don't know what I was going through spiritually and mentally, but it was along this thing of understanding this concept. And I'm driving down this little 2-lane road, and I see a car go off the road and into this ditch backwards, and it was wild. And I pulled over, called 911, and they like transferred me for their counties. It was a pain in the ass. But by the time I
We
talked
love
to
it.
them, like their car already had like the auto call or whatever.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so I waited there and, backed up, and whoever they were had already talked to the people. But it was like, I think it was just are you looking? Are you going to do what you say you're going to do? You say you want to be helpful. Are you going to pull over because it's misty and cold and it's this 2-lane road, nobody's there? You don't really have to wait for the ambulance to show up or the cops to show up because they have already told you. And I'm like, no, yeah. What's an extra hour? What if something happens? What if I don't know.
I
And
think that's a good analogy as
intention.
well, completely, when you think about it, because realistically, in any situation,
Yes.
you want to hope to be helpful.
A value
And
add.
a value added. If you are only planning to take, to waste time to take, to not add anything to it, then you're better off by yourself anyway. You know what I think? That's kind of how I see it. That you're better off anyway. And I think
The
that's a good analogy for
Yeah.
that idea in general. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think yes, you should always be
Well,
a
the fulfillment is kind of like the byproduct, because I think like if you're
yeah.
giving, sometimes if you're a giving person, you're going to get taken from. However, from the right
Depends.
people, that nature, the byproduct is somebody else is going to be very generous to you, and it's going to be very fulfilling to you. And
Yeah.
it's only going to strengthen. And you
Right. And
know,
it should be a give and take. And that's how relationships should work, regardless of the
right.
type of relationship. It should be a give and take. It just because in general, so many of us who have strived, I guess that's the
Hmm.
right word, strived for relationships in our lives that are stable,
Hmm.
that are give and take, that are reciprocal, right? That we are the ones, like I say, I'm very much an empath. We are the ones that feel it the most, but get taken the most, you know? And that's really hard, I think, because as you get older and you see it, when those rose colored, let me tell you, when those rose colored glasses come off and you
Yeah.
start to
Hey,
see the world for what it is,
could you
it's,
imagine two empaths? I feel sorry for you. No, I feel sorry for you. No, I feel sorry for you.
yeah, yeah, it's it's kind of like now I'm like, oh man, like hindsight, I'm like,
uh,
what the hell was what was the fuss about? I'm like, damn, like you sit back and you go, oh, I was just smitten over what? You know what I mean? Like when those glasses come off, you kind of go, oh, they're not going back on. So it's this world is a very interesting one to navigate with like I've been calling this my third act, even though it's my fourth year. I don't really call the young years, I think 20s, 30s, and then 40s, I think, as my third act. And trying to be a podcaster, single mom, a professional, a, a non-professional, all the
what do you
things that
teach your
I'm
kids
doing.
about dating?
Say that again.
What do you teach your kids about dating as you try to navigate it? Because that's understanding very different challenges because you have a lot more to risk.
Yeah,
You're in a way different place, but how do because we always say that sometimes our kids think we're full of shit, just like we did our parents, and they're not
they
always
do.
going to listen to us, but they're going to see what we do. And so they're getting to see you navigate some of these challenges of being married, divorced, dating, all the kind of
Yeah.
gamut, and they're going to see that. And is that something you think about when you're engaging in whatever it is?
Do you mean do I talk to them about what they should look for, or what about me dating? What did I talk about me dating?
Both. Do they ask
Well,
you about it?
mm,
Do they ask you how it goes? Have they ever been concerned when you were not dating? Or have they ever asked you, why
mm.
don't you have someone, or why aren't you married? Um,
Well, interesting enough, my son obviously is of the age that he still has the conception that mommy and daddy may or may not end up back together.
right,
And mommy doesn't still, all I can say to kind of calm the situation is never say never,
right.
right? I always say again, we put everything up to God. That doesn't mean I necessarily believe that piece of it, but it helps quell the
Yeah.
fears, the anxiety, or whatever it may be. I'm like,
Well, and you never know because maybe you probably never
and you
thought
never
you'd be
know. But
doing
right
this.
now, that's so far from I don't even. I'm not
Right,
gonna go there, but regardless of that, right? I think the older I get too, I crave less drama, and I just
right.
sometimes feel some people just again bring more drama
Then
inherently
TNT.
than anything else. And I don't know that now. Again, those rose-colored glasses are off. I see things very differently. But the reality is, I think and then so for him. I'm open about if mommy's going out. I don't necessarily say mommy's going out on a date. No, I'm like, oh, mommy's going to hang out with a friend, whatever case may
Right,
be. My daughter, again, she's going to be 18. She's way more open with her because I also want her one of two things to know what mommy's doing. If God forbid something happens,
right.
you are there's no secrets between us. I mean, don't get wrong to the extent that she needs what she needs to
Yeah,
know, right? Obviously, but there's no secrets in the sense, yeah, mommy's going on a date. I'll be with this person and this is where I'll be,
yeah.
right? On top of that, but also that there's that process. She might ask me, oh, how'd it go? Or, are you seeing this person
You
or
ain't trying
whatever?
to end up on Lester Holt.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I'm like, we're not playing those games. But then also with her she's very school focused, which makes me happy. She's not
Yeah,
very, date focused, which is great. I'm like, you know what, right now that's even better. You focus on what you need to and then focus on that other stuff later. But reality is I always say to her, look for what your heart feels, but also listen to your head. And that's really hard for someone to navigate, for adults to navigate,
Yeah.
because the reality is, I learned that when you are around somebody and you feel butterflies, that's not actually a good sign, because your body does not know the difference between excitement and happiness and a warning sign. It all feels the same thing. We feel butterflies. We go, oh my God, this is the person for me. Oh my God. No, not necessarily, right? You're not going to feel that about. So a lot of us then make these snap judgments about people based on a physiological
Sounds
reaction.
like the way to end up in a bathroom stall doing cocaine and
That's
having
exactly
sex
it.
or something.
That's in the car in the parking lot. That's how a lot of one night stands happen. I mean, with the alcohol too, but
Yeah.
regardless, that's how these things happen, because we go with the most, we go by the most superficial things. I understand it. I'm included. We're human. This is what we do. But try not to jump to conclusions right away. Really try to get to know a person, spend time with a person, and also listen to your intuition, because your body will tell you everything. If you don't feel comfortable, there's a reason you don't feel comfortable, get the hell out of there. You know what I'm saying? Try not to put yourself in situations where you are more vulnerable than you should be. Things happen anyway. We're all human. We end up in situations. There are ways we have to learn to survive,
Yeah.
take care of ourselves, and do what we have to do to protect ourselves. So it's really hard as a woman to try not to scare the crap out of your kid, out of
Hmm.
your daughter, about the potentials of what's out there, and still say to her, but don't worry, it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Um,
fine. You're going to find someone at some point. And she's like, why would I even bother if this
that's
is what's
actually
out
what
there?
we talked about on the podcast yesterday was we talked about how from a man's point of view, I always focus kind of on career. And she said that a lot of men do, they figure focus on career so they can be providers. And she sees a lot of older men who are like, I thought it would happen by now. Let's say 35. They thought they would be married. And kind of what you said was how, you know, like Japan has the problem of low birth rate,
Yeah.
but it's like because they don't want to do that old model. And we're having all these difficulties. And so, like your daughter, mine are 22 and whatever, they're just at some point, why would I even want it? I don't need to. Like women can be CEOs now. You can adopt, you can do all these things. You don't need a man. You can own your own house. You can,
Yep.
so it, and we talk about how important connection is,
Yes, it is.
and but if they don't want to fool with it, is it going to take us, we have to understand what we're doing right now. And just like anything, what is it, one drug that will heal somebody will kill somebody else.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the same with the internet. It's the
Yep.
same with Zoom. It's the
Yep.
same with this podcast and the information we put out. We're trying
Yep.
to help people, um, get them to ask a question they've never asked, or
Yeah.
maybe look at a different perspective,
I've gotten
within
to the point.
themselves.
Yeah, I've gotten to the point that I'm like, try to protect your peace at all costs. You know, um, Mental health is literally what will affect your physical health,
Hmm.
and vice versa.
Oh
But
yeah.
mental health especially.
When I have
And
spells that I have the less sleep too.
yes, exactly. And having being able to have peace in your life should be tantamount. That doesn't mean that we're not going to have kids running around, or we're not going to, I don't mean
Right.
that normal hustle bustle of every day. What I mean is not having excess parasites, we'll say,
Yes.
sucking the life out of you. Because
People
guess what?
people
That
whose
parasite will live to
yeah.
100 and you'll be
Yeah.
sick before, you know what I mean? You'll be sick and they'll be living to 110, talk about, I don't know what happened,
It's all
whatever.
about the intent.
Yes.
If their
Yes.
intent is not a value add in their life, sure mistakes are going to happen, but
Yep.
we're all human. But
It's a
if the
human experience.
intention is not there, then it should be an automatic kind of no. Now, do you have more, you know, single friends married friends, like
Mm.
women friends, like the groups kind of, how does that work? Being
Interestingly
married.
enough, my closest
Mm-hmm.
friends and family are in relationships or are married. Um, actually, one of them isn't, but she's fairly younger than me and she is living life to the fullest, girl. She is blessed. Let me tell you, that one is amazing. She's doing fantastic. But some of my, you know, I wouldn't say necessarily they were closer friends at one point, but people separate. We still talk here and
Yeah.
there. Some of them are more single too, but just kind of, I think for me, it's a mix of both. Um, and it's interesting because I don't know that it's necessarily a positive or a negative thing because we realize, anything can happen any day. You know what I'm saying? Like I did not see myself, being in this position and I was thrust into this position. Um, again, there are times that I say to myself, do I suck it up and just try to push through this? Or do meaning push through it, meaning going back to what I was comfortable with?
Mm-hmm.
Or continue on this path, my own journey, where I then can figure out what the next steps are, for me
Oh
and my
yeah.
kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm okay with being on this journey. I'm okay with whatever good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say bad because I don't like putting that out there, but life is gonna life. So
Yeah.
you just say whatever life, throws at me, but I'm hoping for just the good. And whatever happens, we're just gonna roll through it. And I think having that support system, and I do feel bad because a lot of people don't necessarily have a support system. And I've been very blessed like that. Very blessed.
How do you pick yourself up when you have less than optimal moments? We use good
Mm.
words to describe less than optimal situations. I mean, it's just, you feel a
When you're
little
just not
bit.
feeling great.
Yeah. How do you get through that?
I think it depends on what the reasoning is that I'm just not feeling great. I love to journal, which
Mm-hmm.
helps a lot. Sometimes even my voice journal, sometimes I just can't even get the words on paper. I'll do a voice journal. Other times, honestly, it's just forced rest. Sometimes I realize if I'm not feeling great, it's because I'm just not rested enough. Sometimes it's forced rest. A lot of music for me,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of music. Um, I have been lucky that I graduated from therapy about a year ago. So about a year ago. So I had that at the time, but she's still there if I needed that.
Yeah.
I got severely triggered probably about 2 months ago with something with my ex, like that I had not for so long, and I was a mess. And I called her, I was like, I need a session. Because I don't. And she said, that's okay. Think about it. You lived through the earthquake and you just had an aftershock. So since you knew what to do for the earthquake, now you know what to do for the aftershock. And I was like, oh shit, that's amazing. I never even thought about it that
Yeah.
way. And it helped me move on to the next thing.
Because it may not
And
be the last earthquake if you live in Cali.
exactly. And realistically, that's how I see it. I
Yeah.
see it as just moving
Realistically,
to the next thing.
you live in a flood zone.
Yeah,
It's gonna
exactly.
flood.
That's a
And
good way
that
to
and
put
that's
it.
kind of like that. I just see it though, but kind of in, all we're doing, I think we're learning to be more intentional and deliberate with our
Mhm.
actions, our choices, and that means from anything. And I think what the pandemic and stuff did, just like Austin, Texas has become this crazy place, hub for comedy and
Mm.
Joe Rogan and all that, and all that he's
Oh
brought, and all
yeah.
the people that have moved from Cali to there, that we're realizing you don't have to be in New York, you don't have to be in Hollywood anymore. People can do whatever it is they want to do from anywhere. And so if you want to live in Montana, now you can. You can be very deliberate with the things
Yep.
you want to do. And, I think, all of life is like that, whether and with it's your intentions and, used to it was everything you did was kind of because of a reason. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, if you want to work on a boat, then you probably need to live near a port. But
True. Or
unless you
relocate.
the SS Minnow, if you want to work on Gilligan's Island. But one thing I like to ask as we get near to wrap up, we've had about 2 hours. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Wow. Look at
so
that.
we didn't really even plan that, but so is kind of as a result of some of the less than optimal moments you've had that have kind of, you described it as thrust you in to
Mm.
what you're doing now? And mine was the same way. I was thrust into it. Um, what is something that you've experienced that's happened that 10 years ago you would have never thought in a million years that was going to happen, but has happened because of this new pursuit or way of living, identity you're pursuing, self-improvement, whatever you want to call it, evolution to your higher best self?
What forced me to evolve?
Well, and what's been the best experience and come out of it that's been something magical that has just been a blessing or something you're grateful for that never would have happened?
I'll tell you, a year and a half ago, 2 years
Hmm.
ago, I didn't recognize myself.
Me
I
neither.
didn't know who I was. I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger, not just physically, just in general. I was like, who are you? You never foresaw. Now, I've been in two major relationships in my life, and both of them I was married.
Mhm.
I married my daughter's father. We were together for about 13 years, and then I had to escape that situation, literally escape it. Um, and then 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago this month, I met my son's father.
Mhm.
And that's the one I believe that we trauma bonded, right? So we were like in love instantly. If you had told me 10 years after that, exactly 10 years after that, that this person that I was so just enthralled with, smitten with, that I had decided that had was raising my daughter, that was in my house, that we had a kid with, would have basically destroyed the foundation that I thought that we had, destroyed my foundation that I thought that I had. I would have thought you were crazy. I was like, there's no way. Now, were there red flags? Of course. And what do? We ignore red flags constantly. We're not talking beige flags. We're like, ah, it's not a big deal. I'm talking blaring red flags that were like, no, and excusing everything away.
Right.
And so for me, I would never have believed 10 years ago that not only would I have had another marriage, because I trusted another person enough to do that, especially when I had said, I'm not getting married again. And if I get married again, it's for
Mm.
life. There's going to be, I'm like, I'm not doing that again. I'm not trusting again. And I was convinced it was the right move to make the second time. And not more than a year later, my life and my kids' life, my family just completely fell apart. So for me, if you would have told me 10 years ago, I was two marriages in and two that did not work out in, I would have thought you were insane. But what I do know from all of that is it has forced me to do so much inner work on myself to say, like you had said, what is it about me that's attracting these types of people? And I
How do
realized,
you forgive yourself?
yes, exactly. And for me, I've been learning to forgive myself.
Yeah, it's a process.
I can't even got I haven't even got to the point yet where I can possibly even
Do
forgive the
do
exes.
women feel shame the same way men, like if I've done fucked up things or had fucked up behavior, be it towards my wife, my daughter, anybody, I feel shame and then I isolate. Do women feel shame the same way?
Well, I don't know how you feel shame, but I can tell you that if you're human,
Mm-hmm.
if you have any human experience at all and you're not a narcissist, there are going to be moments of shame. A lot of times, and what in my experience, a lot of men from kids
Mm-hmm.
feel shame, but they're not learned how to process that shame.
Yeah.
And it comes out in crappy, really dangerous behavior. It also creates narcissists. And I know because I was married to two of them, right?
Mm.
So for me, the shame that I felt was about was 15-fold for me. It was, how did I allow this in my house again? How did I think that he was going to change just for me? How
Right.
did I think that? What did I do?
You have to learn to trust yourself again.
Yeah. And when I tell you, there's an episode I think I talked about a couple months ago where I said I still don't trust myself completely. There are moments that I have to look back and go, is that the right decision? Or do you really want to let that person in there? Or do you want to let that person go? When I tell you trusting yourself and getting rid of the shame. Shame is one thing my therapist told me, shame is not an emotion. We think shame is an emotion. It's not.
Really?
Shame is a learned behavior.
Hmm.
We are told to be shamed because of something that we think society is going to be is telling us is wrong. So
Yeah.
we hide it, we seclude it, we make it a part of our inner self. Now, I'm not saying that there are not things that we've all done that we shouldn't be ashamed of, right?
Right.
But to continue to hold shame and not heal it, that's what causes all of these other outbursts of action, let's put it that way, or inaction. Some people just don't do anything because they're just too ashamed of what's going to happen ahead of time too.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to learn how to, one, understand certain things are out of your control and are not your fault. Two, to realize, okay, I made that choice, I have to stand by that choice and the outcome of it, but nothing I could have done could have changed it. And I have to learn to trust myself and trust my voice and my intuition again, to know that I can make the right decisions
Hmm.
based on these old decisions that I made. It's a really hard process. It really is. And it takes a lot of internal work. And some people don't want to be bothered with the work.
I
And for
made
me,
bad choices. It doesn't make me a bad person, and it doesn't mean I'm going to make bad choices in the future.
right, right. And
I had a
reflect
lapse
and
of
reflect.
character or judgment, something.
Yeah. And reflect on your bad choices, right? Because we all make bad choices. Some make really bad choices. Those are character flaws. We're not talking character flaws. We're talking just the human experience, right? Just we make bad choices, we make bad decisions, we go into crappy relationships, we are codependent. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And all the reality is that we have to learn that as humans, we have free will. We can change any experience we're in. It just takes tenacity. Unfortunately, it takes resources, which is some of the biggest problems. Unfortunately, it takes resources and the will. And sometimes the will is too strong, to shy away from. So we'll
You
see
have to
how it
enjoy
goes one
you
day
have
at a
to
time.
enjoy the process,
Yeah.
otherwise you're not going to keep doing it
Yeah.
when it gets hard, and that doesn't matter. And I was thinking about that, like you said, that self-love of the podcast, and it's
Mhm.
yours. Because I don't want to do it all the time either. And
Yeah.
but life is that way, relationships are that way.
Yep.
It's that's how to find out if you can really enjoy it is am I still willing to do it? Is it still giving me something? Is it
Yeah.
more good than it is bad?
Right.
You know?
And
Uh,
even when it is bad, even when it seems like it's going to be bad forever,
yeah,
it's not. It's not. I mean, we all have moments, days, weeks, months, sometimes years, where everything is just crappy. And then all of a sudden, you might just wake up one day and go, hold on, I can fix this. I can change this one step at a time. That's
yeah.
it. It's all it takes is one step at a time.
Sometimes it's I'm like one day at a time. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, like I remember just having the wind sucked out of me, not even wanting to edit yesterday, and I had stuff to do, and had all these things to do, and I kind of wasn't in the mode I wanted to, and I don't know, I had a moment where I was like, well, that episode still got to release at midnight. You still have an interview this afternoon. I know you want to get your tattoo. Sitting around and feeling bad is not going to do anything for you.
No.
Just, what's it going to show your daughter if you don't do these
Yeah.
things you said you would do? So just go get it done. And
And I'll tell you what.
I journaled about it and
Yeah.
took off, and yeah, it all
And
worked out.
sometimes in those spaces, you know what you need? A nap.
Or a prayer, or
Prayer,
meditation,
prayer, and
journal.
nap, and the meditation will lead to a nap. So trust
I'll
me,
do, yeah,
all roads lead to naps.
I
Trust
do
me on
all
that.
of it. I do all of it. Pray,
Yes,
meditate, journal,
that's right.
whatever I can do to evolve, just try to be a better human being. But
Agreed.
yeah. So I'm gonna give you a chance to shout out. we're doing this all backwards, and I'm gonna do something at the end
I know
that'll
you didn't
show
do your
you why.
intro, right?
Yeah, no, so watch this. Shout out your podcast name and website, or if you have one.
Well, my website is a work in progress, so it's not live
Okay.
yet. It'll be some time, but my podcast is Ride or Die, from
Okay.
teens to Prosecco Queens. It was kind of along the lines like you were describing of yours, where it's
Uh-huh.
like a join me for a nice glass of bubbly and let's talk and get to know each other. And I say to me, all women are queens, so for our queens
Yeah.
and the kings that support us and want to empower us and learn about us, come join us. So it's Ride
Very,
or Die.
that's very, very Rican Bronx.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I love it. I love
That
it. Thank you.
generation, like it kind of reminds me of like old hip hop. And
That's right.
yeah, yeah,
Thank you very much. I'm,
yeah.
I'm privileged that you said that. Thank you. So yes, it's Ride or Die from Teens to Prosecco Queens. On my email is proseccoqueenspodcast@gmail.com. Open to anybody who wants to be a guest or just talk or give me advice or thoughts or anything. I'm on IG at Prosecco
Hmm.
Queens Podcast and on TikTok at Prosecco Queens Podcast and also on YouTube at Prosecco Queens
Yeah.
Podcast.
And I'll be putting all that in the show notes. But
Thank you.
yeah, so we kind of did this backwards, guys. I hope you made it this far. And if you did, welcome to the Men of the House podcast. And on today's episode, we have Teresa Rosario-Hernandez. And I'm excited to talk to her. But I'm excited the conversation we had. I think we're very kindred spirits, and this
Agreed.
is kind of one of those things that goes to the editing and or unediting was, and why you always hit record and leave record. And sometimes this is just the way it goes. And it was great talking to you. And I'm gonna go be father, dad, and all the other things just like you.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so
So
much for having me, Richard. It was
yes,
such an amazing conversation. I
yeah,
can't believe the time flew the way that it did.
yeah.
Unbelievable. So I hope everybody stuck it out to the end. And please listen to Richard's podcast. Come visit me on
Yep.
mine and let's do
Yeah, I'm
this.
gonna
Get
come
the good
check
word
out
out.
more. I think it's gonna
Thank you.
be, I think it'll be coming out around October 2nd. So
Perfect.
yeah.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you
Well,
so
you have a
much.
good rest of your day.
You too. Take
All
care.
right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. Remember, go out and be the person that you want to meet.
Let's go.